do we do nothing, and do we just allow coins to be swept up if a cryptographically relevant quantum computer appears? B, do we do something and try to throttle how these coins can be spent, to try to flatten the curve, so to speak, of economic damage and volatility that could be incurred? Or C, do we just stop allowing for the spending of quantum vulnerable coins? And there's a lot of complexity and minutia that I think are going to go into debating these different concepts and sort of the game theory and what might result from that. And one of the things that I think should be important to keep in mind is just the KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. And even though it's certainly unpalatable, I mean, all of these options I think are unpalatable in different ways. I think that the simple freezing of coins and then hopefully having a quantum safe recovery option in the future would be the simpler path, but we'll see.
So just to clarify, we're talking Jameson's stance is freezing the coins. Do you want to define the set just to make sure we have the right context? Or do you want to maybe give an example set of just to make sure we're clear?
Well, so for one, I think talking about quote unquote Satoshi's coins is kind of a distraction. While certainly a decent portion of these coins may or may not have been mined and owned by Satoshi, really what we're talking about is any coin that is encumbered by a locking script that is requiring elliptic curve cryptography to redeem those funds. And so I'm not just talking about long range versus short range, I'm talking about anything, regardless of whether or not the key is currently exposed on the blockchain.
And one more clarifying question. Is the recovery mechanism going to be needed for you to take this stance?
For me, no, but I suspect that in order to make it more palatable to gain consensus, that some sort of recovery mechanism that would hopefully only be usable by the quote-unquote true original owners of the coins to be able to spend them.
So a strongly nice to have, but not a requirement. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. Mike, or Hunter, since Mike passed it to you. Go ahead.
Pass.
Yeah, if you don't mind, similar to what Jameson did, concisely and keep it concise. What do you think we should do with these coins and et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, there's also a contingent of Bitcoiners. I would basically consider myself to be included in that, which really just advocates for or has the opinion of just doing nothing and letting the chips fall where they may. And one thing that has always been the case for Bitcoin has essentially been priced into Bitcoin because people know about these. There's awareness that that maybe one day there's a threat. Regardless of that, and also one evidence for that not being priced in is because gold is quantum resistant, and look at the gold market cap, and so maybe Bitcoin could be higher if there wasn't this concern about quantum computing. But so really people buying Bitcoin know about this, and this is the contract that we've signed ever since we started using Bitcoin in a way, because it's everything over 21 million, not like everything over 20 million minus some subset of reused coins or whatever, or lost coins. And it's kind of like buried treasure, right? Like if you have the technology to go out and like people who buried treasure long ago didn't foresee that there was technology like that. Now we do, but if people come up with a better metal detector just for Bitcoin, then that's essentially letting those people do what they want. And also, I would consider liquidation to be one of the more popular approaches, at least amongst the broader set of Bitcoiners, which may or may not be as informed.
Okay, so just to clarify, push comes to shove, better to let the funds get taken, act like it's buried treasure rather than doing some sort of freeze scheme.
Yeah, and
Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, and ownership is 9/10 of the law, right? And we literally have laws on unclaimed property. So I think a legal argument could be made that a lot of these coins, these lost coins, are unclaimed property.
Okay. Mike Casey, how does your opinion differ from Hunter or Jameson?
Well, it doesn't differ from either of them. I kind of agree with both of them, both aspects of them. That's why I sat in the middle intentionally, and I wanted both of them to explain it because they're not wrong, either side of them. I understand that a lot of people have the fact that Satoshi's coins will never move, which is never a certainty, or Satoshi's coins are one thing, but also reused address in a quantum attack. They have that priced into their mental model that Bitcoin is supposed to be secure from any of that stuff, and it breaks the model of Bitcoin if quantum comes along and rips off the 4 million exposed coins right now that are out there. So I get that, and that's bad. But the other thing, I look at confiscation, and I say, okay, Bitcoin was founded as a self-sovereign money that you control and you alone control, and nobody can take it away from you. It's an opt-in system. And you're saying now, okay, well, we're just going to take all those people's money if they don't do something by some time. They can't use it anymore, maybe forever, right? To me, that seems unfair too. So I'm in the camp of restriction. So choice A is complete lockdown, maybe get it back. Choice B is do nothing and let the chips fall where they may. But the third option is to restrict. And what's really cool about this option, if you're doing a restriction, then you can always restrict further later, right? So you can say, hey, we're going to restrict first and foremost and then see what happens. And the cool thing, especially with Hourglass V1, it's so simple to implement. You could implement it. It causes almost no harm. And under the conditions, which are debatable, that legitimizes the attempt to attack those particular coins, the P2PK coins, then that will give us an actual early warning system that, hey, quantum might be becoming an issue. And we can use that information to enact maybe harsher measures if we decide as a community to do so.
All right, so the word that's been put into the lexicon recently, confiscatory. Confiscatory. This made-up word that I just heard in the last few months when we've been talking about this. I feel like we're using this word to define when for instance a freeze or a burn or whatever. And I'm curious, Jameson, do you consider that confiscatory?
Confiscatory.
I'm not going to be able to say it. Do you consider it confiscation if we freeze the coins? I'm interested to hear your take on this.
It's actually kind of a quantum state of confiscation. Because from one perspective, you are not allowing people to access their funds. That is from the sort of top-down imposition perspective. However, there is a completely opposing perspective from those who wish to secure the economic value of their holdings against massive devaluation and economic volatility, which is, I want to do what I can to try to secure the value of these funds by preventing mass liquidation events, and so I'm going to reject the spending of anything that I believe is vulnerable. So there's both an offensive perspective that I think upsets a lot of people, and there's a defensive perspective that I think is interesting to many holders. And then, there's a lot of game theory here as well, right? So you could also argue that, whale holders or people who have the vast majority of their net worth in this may be more prone to lean towards the defensive perspective, whereas people who are still accumulating Bitcoin and would love to buy the dip, or just are hardcore 1 BTC equals 1 BTC unit of account folks, will be more prone to take the offensive perspective.
So we got our timer up now. So let me just get right to it. Why do you hate Hourglass, Jameson?
V1 I think was easier to reason about, but I had some issues with it. V2 creates more complexity, and with more complexity comes more things to argue about. It's creating new sets of game theory, and I think will require more time for us to think through all of the possible scenarios of how this could play out. For example, I believe Hourglass V2 essentially puts us on like a 50-plus year time frame for all of those funds to eventually be able to be liquidated.
At a minimum.
Yeah. And over that time frame, if we're assuming cryptographically relevant quantum computers continue to get cheaper and cheaper, then how does that actually change game theory over the decades, perhaps to the point where the miners themselves have cryptographically relevant quantum computers and can essentially be mining a lot of the outputs directly to themselves.
Quick question. If we just pause on V2, because it's sort of being worked out, are you against version 1 idea proposed with the idea of Hourglass? And for those who don't know, Hourglass is just, you can only use one UTXO per block. That's the idea.
If I recall correctly, my main problem with V1 is that actually it didn't do enough. I think it was only looking at the pay-to-public key funds, right? Meanwhile, really, if there's a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, it's going to be affecting a lot more funds than that.
But it's something that can be implemented before we, have to worry about coming to consensus on, maybe doing a possible confiscation of all unspendable coins. It's a lot easier to hit that bar of, hey, let's just, freeze these P2PK at least, right? But because then we have to worry about if we're talking about. It's a little bit controversial, to say the least, that we're just going to lock everybody's coins, and then we have to develop a timetable for that. So I don't know how quickly we'll be able to come to consensus on just that. I mean, if you think V2 is bad, just imagine how that, and then add anything on top of that for block size with the quantum stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, and like one thing people the V2 essentially restricts the throughput. V1 also restricts the throughput just at a lower and simpler mechanism.
And with a subset of the coins. That's the other big differentiator, because V2 is amongst all vulnerable coin types.
Yeah, and so the reason for that is because we want to minimize the impact on essentially the price, and because that results in minor capitulation. There could be a scenario where enough miners drop off the network, we didn't even reach the next difficulty adjustment. So like just halting Bitcoin in its tracks. And so there's that consideration, right? The market consideration, the price, whatever. But famously, inflation is transitory, right? That's like the supply will, I don't think it'll be as serious, for one, because a lot of these institutions or whatever will probably be adding the Bitcoin to the balance sheet. Like, what are they going to do? Sell them for dollars, right? And so, it might not be as serious as we think. And also, if it does get serious, then that's just a good opportunity to pick up cheap Bitcoin.
So Hunter made a V2 comment, so I'm going to make a liquidation comment too. The other point about it is Bitcoin is not fungible. So if massive amounts of coins are stolen from people that they can prove, no, this was mine, I got it off this exchange, I had it in this address, here's my XPub key, well, then it becomes a legal matter if they try to put them on an exchange to sell them en masse. Right, so it's going to be really hard for those coins to find liquidity. I mean, if you just take a look at Rosalcon, what was it, Bitfinex?
Yeah.
I forget which one. They hid that money for 7 years, and then they spent just a wee little bit of it and were immediately busted.
So as a result, we don't necessarily need to change the protocol at a consensus level. It's in a way, it's also part of human behavior and our reaction to the event, and maybe restricting Bitcoin's fungibility at a social level, but not necessarily at a consensus level.
I think the human behavior thing is an important aspect to actually talk about. So one of the biggest takeaways that I've had from our conversations yesterday, and I hate to speak for anyone other than myself, I had a feeling that a rough consensus amongst a lot of the people here is actually that you could argue the bigger threat than quantum computing is the fear of quantum computing. And so, we can go down all of these rabbit holes of doing threat modeling and talking about what different actors may or may not do if they have a cryptographically relevant quantum computer. But I would posit that if there's even a general whiff that someone has a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, that will cause massive panic, and that's what we're trying to avoid.
Well, let me posit a scenario for you then. Okay, let's say we have a Flag Day confiscation, and Satoshi, who hasn't had to move his coins or even think about it, is still around and does still have all of his keys. Satoshi is now forced into a position where he has to move his Bitcoin or lose them forever, and he decides to move all of his Bitcoin. We don't know if it's Satoshi or a quantum attacker. What happens then? So we could set off the very
what happens
crisis
then,
we're
huh?
trying to avoid, right?
Got him.
I mean, we have to give Satoshi an opportunity to secure their coins.
Well, yes, but that you give an opportunity. But here's with Hourglass, right? Here's the cool thing about Hourglass. If it worked out that way, he could hide. He could hide in the outflow of quantum coins. He could actually redeem his coins, and nobody would know it was
So
him.
let me ask a question for Jameson. Based on what Mike's saying, this is pretty much just like it's gonna blast radius how fast these coins. I mean, you put this into play. The amount of P2, PK, UTXOs that are moving are so small right now that unlikely to negatively affect any real use case or user experience right now. Is there a downside to just implementing Hourglass V1 as a stopgap safety measure way ahead of time? And do you see any problem with that?
I do think that sort of setting aside all of the other implementation of post-quantum cryptography, focusing on a BIP that only talks about how to handle pay-to-public key outputs could be interesting and non-controversial, or at least like non-damaging to any current holders, right? So for example, I think I said yesterday, I don't understand why we even allow people to still create pay-to-public key outputs. Like, why don't we put the kibosh on that right now?
That would be part of it, is disabling them
Which
going forward.
I think is totally non-controversial. I think maybe a handful of those get created every year. And then if we want to then take the next step and say, okay, we're also going to implement some sort of throughput restriction on redeeming those outputs, perhaps that will incentivize any remaining actors that are still around that want to be able to move those funds.
Well, and then I was thinking, Taj brought up commit reveal. During this period, if you did have, this Hourglass idea, you implement it, and then as soon as these pay-to-public keys start moving every block, you're like, well, maybe a quantum computer exists, and then you have the opportunity for another stopgap commit reveal scheme.
Right. There, you can always tighten. You can't loosen, but you can always tighten.
I have another sort of tangential question. Is there any motivation with Hourglass or with the non-freezing route? Sorry, just in general with any sort of like Peter Todd tail emission sort of initiative, like where it's like, hey, this would also maybe be good for Bitcoin because it would introduce some sort of idea of a tail emission. Is there any motivation with any of this for that aspect, or is that just a side effect that might be good or bad and you have no opinion on? I'm kind of curious if Hunter can talk about this, and then we can go to you, Mike.
Yeah, like in some ways, confiscating the coins or restricting the coins just to serve the purpose of tail emission. Some might consider that to be confiscatory and also like disingenuous, right? Just because like it could be working to the miners' favor, and so we can't trust these damn greedy miners with our God-earned sats, But that's one perspective.
Yeah. So burning or freezing, that's actually not really confiscatory. It's really you're denying them access to theirs. But if you do a redistribution, that is actually confiscatory because you're taking from them and giving them to somebody else, right? That they now have possession of these things versus just outright destroying them. So I guess that would be considered more, if you did a redistribution, it would be potentially more confiscatory than even just burning the coins. That being said, there's a massive security budget problem that's only going to get worse, and I just looking at all the data I see, I think we got about 8 years to figure out fees and a security budget. Otherwise, we're going to have to start making some hard decisions about a tail emission. and I don't want to have that conversation. So,
That's okay. I already figured that out.
well, yeah, there are options, but you know, enacting them's probably a little harder than it looks. Yeah.
I'd be curious to hear any thoughts from this.
Well, I mean,
What did you figure out for us who don't know how you figured out how to fix Bitcoin?
I think some of the game theory around like Hourglass V2 and how that may be helpfully offsetting some of the subsidy issues is interesting. And even though it's like a 50, 60 plus year long proposal, it's not a permanent fix, right? It's kicking the can down the road.
We just need to make sure it
decades.
outlives us.
Oh,
that's
yeah.
that's all we need to worry about.
What about the future generations? Come on.
They'll figure it out. That's how the world works.
Right. So I started thinking about this issue in terms of just sort of economic demand and supply of block space a while back, and I have a rough proposal that hasn't been written up or formally submitted or anything, but I talked about it recently, which is this Goldilocks idea, essentially coming up with a dynamic block space adjustment algorithm that is somewhat analogous to the difficulty adjustment, and that you would essentially want to try to adjust the supply of block space in a manner that is commensurate with what appears to be the demand for block space. So short version is like if fees are sky high through the roof, it looks like demand is really high for block space, then within some other subset of safety parameters, bump up the supply of block space a little bit, and then vice versa. If, for example, right now, I would say block space should be a lot lower. You should actually shrink the supply of block space when there is essentially no demand for it and no fees that are being paid.
The point is that it would make block space elastic. Right now, it is inelastic. It does not change at all, regardless of demand.
We got to aggregate all those inscription UTXOs first, though, Jameson.
You got to pay for it.
All right, we have a couple minutes left. Hunter, why does Jameson have a bad take?
Well, in the words of a prominent and well-known Bitcoin Core developer here, changing Bitcoin just because people are scared is stupid and dumb.
I think I know. I think I know who said that. Okay.
Chatham House rules, right?
I mean, I was looking for a fierce debate, but it sounds like we kind of agree to disagree. Everyone kind of understands each other's take. Is there any sort of, we have like a minute left, 2 minutes left, but is there any sort of things that need to be fleshed out that you have questions to each other about?
We got questions from the audience. I mean,
Sure. I didn't know we were taking questions from the audience. Yeah. Do you want me to pass mine?
So
Also, if you want to direct it at someone, be
it-
explicit.
I mean,
or if it's the whole panel.
Really, to anyone in the room, please don't shoot me for asking this, but I think it's
Too late.
Wait. It's an inevitable question that I think will come up. And Vitalik years ago wrote an article about this. Oftentimes in cryptography, we don't strive for perfect solutions. We relax our security assumptions in order to achieve something optimal. And so a question might come up from industry and some of the more like traditional legacy institutions. Would anyone in this room, and I personally would not, but would anyone in this room be comfortable with some degree of centralization when we talk about P2PK and potentially forming some kind of structures where people come together and go through some sort of process to prove ownership of these coins instead of relying on purely
well,
decentralized?
the problem is there's no way to prove ownership. You cannot. You literally, they're randomly generated. And an attacker would look just like an honest old miner. There's no way to differentiate.
He's talking about screenshots from old,
Oh, that's
Silk
totally
Road
legit.
stuff.
That's good.
Social proof. I mean,
There's no way to.
One potential avenue of quote unquote centralization and safety that might be somewhat palatable in like an emergency situation is if we basically restricted the nodes from like relaying any quantum vulnerable spins, and you had to privately send them to mining pools and hopefully protect yourself a little bit. But,
There's another possibility, which is just that you commit to a Stark proof of your BIP38 or BIP39 secrets, right? So like BIP38 wallets are encrypted, and so you can take the pre-encrypted
I see
thing
Taj
and
shaking his
commit
head.
to that. No, Taj, really?
No, BIP38, it's not applicable for BIP38. Those are just hosed. They're just as hosed as P2PK. They're random.
Well, so I guess basically, if you've got your funds in a paper wallet, there may be a concern that those kind of individually created keys might be disabled in favor of something that would need mnemonic seed, like your wallet to have.
I mean,
been
this
based
is
on
concerning though,
BIP39.
because those of us that had paper wallets, the whole idea was you could bury that thing and never look at it again and dig it up 20 years later and be rich. And you're saying, oh no, that's all gone now. Sorry.
Hey, Austin, how are we doing on time?
One more question.
I know we have a mic right here ready to
oh,
run,
okay,
but
then maybe two more.
Okay,
and
two more
then-
questions,
And then we
all right.
gotta cut it.
and then we'll keep the answers concise and quick.
Do your opinions differ between vulnerable addresses and address reuse?
Well, that's the main difference between V1 and V2 is V2, it tries to address reused addresses in a manner that makes them still usable, but, limits them, rather strictly and also, more fees.
we had a lot of conversations about address reuse yesterday, and I think most, once again, try not to speak for everyone, but rough consensus, at least at the protocol developer level, seemed to be that requiring implementation of address indexes is a non-starter, but once again, we can bike shed about that.
And from what I understand, about 90% of reused addresses are like coins and reused addresses are there recently. These coins are moving constantly. They're managed. They have custodians or people who are using them actively. So that there's another argument that maybe we shouldn't necessarily restrict or affect reused addresses.
Well, and there's one other thing.
But should we take the last question? I just
Sure.
want to make sure. Sorry to pause you here. Let's just take the last question so we'll wrap up
Yeah,
there.
so what makes me really uncomfortable about confiscation and throttling is it feels like a very fiat mentality to infringe property rights so we can kind of prop up the market. Like when we think about the context in which Bitcoin was birthed, like 2008, 2009, bailouts, Chancellor on the brink, this kind of has the specter of like a plunge protection team or
Yeah.
isn't this sort of introducing a dangerous mentality that if we think there's going to be a market panic, maybe for some other reason, we're going to artificially constrict supply just to kind of keep the price propped up?
Yeah. You want to handle that?
Oh, I'm just saying 100%. Yeah, that's not that would be like violating Bitcoin's core principles and its founding and we tell a lot of stories about Bitcoin. That's definitely one of them. So yeah, I think that's stupid.
And
Doing
Jameson?
that's stupid. And dumb.
Yes, and well, it is inevitable that inviolable properties are going to be violated and people are going to be upset. So, like I said, some people will say this is quote a top-down centralized imposition upon holders, and then there is the alternative perspective that no, there's a large set of holders who actually consider this to be a security problem, and we want to incentivize people to secure their coins because it's not just about me securing my coins, it's about the entire ecosystem being secured.
And I'll just say both of them are true. What you said, and that is true, but they're also, Satoshi himself originally said lost coins can be considered a donation to the entirety of Bitcoin. And if you allow people to reclaim lost coins, it violates that. So it's just pick your poison. Right?
All right. Well, we're out of time. Can we get a round of applause for the panelists? Hey, thank you.
I'm pretty sure I won.
I'm excited to welcome up Light. Where you at? Light.
talk about quantum resistant rollups. Rollups have been a thing I've been telling myself I need to learn more about for the last year, so I'm excited to use quantum as an excuse to do that. Did I put that full screen? Yeah, I mean, it's simple. So you just do that. Do you want 25 minutes too short? You want the full 30?
It'd be great to. We'll see, but I mean, if I'm not like done talking at 25, then we'll go for the full 30. But
Alright, we'll put 25 there. If you go over, that's fine.
okay, just I want to manage time for questions.
Yeah, that's what I think. Talk goes 20, but you got it.
Cool. Great. Thank you all for getting here early. So yeah, I'm giving a talk about quantum resistant rollups. Before getting into the quantum resistance aspect, since I think rollups are still a kind of fresh topic for a lot of Bitcoiners, I figured I'd give a brief intro to validity rollups. But first, a detour into rollup ontology, just because I think once you take a peer into the rollups world a little bit, you'll get hit with a lot of terminology. So I just want to maybe quickly clarify that for people. So what is a rollup, just like in general? No, not those kinds of rollups. A rollup is a blockchain that stores enough data inside of the blocks of a parent blockchain to compute its current canonical state. And what this gives you in terms of its properties are that rollup blockchains have data availability that is equivalent to the parent chain because its state data is stored inside of parent chain blocks. Its data is as available as its parent chain's data. And it also has double spend resistance that is equivalent to the parent chain. So whenever a rollup block gets confirmed inside of the parent chain block, you need to actually reorganize the parent chain block in order to reorganize the rollup block as well. This kind of differentiates rollups from like side chains, which can typically be independently reorganized, separate from the parent blockchain. So there are two kind of high-level categories of rollups. There are like quote-unquote sovereign rollups, and then there are smart contract rollups. The primary difference being that sovereign rollups are typically just somebody running a full node somewhere. Maybe that full node is like running in block producer mode, and then they just stuff blocks inside of the blocks of some parent blockchain, and they're just kind of using that parent blockchain for data availability and double spend resistance. Smart contract rollups actually have a kind of smart contract connection on the parent chain. So they're typically doing some kind of checkpointing into a specific contract, and then you can put assets into that smart contract and move the assets back and forth between the rollup chain and the parent chain. But let's take a closer look at this. So within the kind of smart contract rollup paradigm, you typically have two major categories of rollups: optimistic rollups and validity rollups. And so we're going to be talking about validity rollups specifically today. So what is a validity rollup then? A validity rollup, it has a trustless bridge using this smart contract on the parent chain between the rollup chain and the parent chain that is secured by a validity proof verification smart contract. What that means in particular is like for every kind of checkpoint that the rollup is putting on the parent chain, it is giving that checkpoint to the specific smart contract, and then it's also providing this cryptographic validity proof to the smart contract to prove that the checkpoint and all of the rollup transactions in the checkpoint are valid. And with that, users can receive asset transfers on the rollup chain even if they are offline and even if they have never used the rollup chain before. So the same way that a new user of Bitcoin can just spin up a Bitcoin wallet, give their counterparty an address, and receive coins without having any kind of pre-existing relationship. A rollup is just a blockchain, so you can kind of treat it in your mental model as like it's a blockchain. The user experience is just like using any other blockchain. Thanks to the fact that all of the transactions are validity proven, only the current owner of an asset can actually transfer or withdraw the asset. And typically, users can also withdraw their assets from the rollup chain to the parent chain, even if the operator of the rollup is uncooperative, meaning that the users have this ability to unilaterally exit the chain. And the way that they typically do this is they would just go to that smart contract that's on layer 1 or the parent chain, and they would supply a cryptographic proof to that chain, to that smart contract, that they own these assets in the rollup and they want to get them out. And the smart contract has the ability to verify that proof and give the user their funds, even if the rollup chain itself is halted. And then finally, you get this nice capability that transactions on the rollup can be compressed to strip out data that is made redundant by the validity proofs. And this enables higher throughput, which we'll get into later and kind of explain exactly how that works. So typical kind of flow is if the rollup is, let's say, built on Bitcoin, Alice would kind of send BTC to a rollup deposit address on L1. The rollup software would detect the deposit and credit Alice's address on the rollup. Alice would send her BTC to Bob. Now, let's say Bob wants to get his BTC back out onto the main chain, so he sends his BTC to a withdrawal contract on the rollup side. The rollup block producer would prove the validity of Alice and Bob's transactions and then submit a checkpoint to the smart contract on layer 1. And then the smart contract would kind of spit the BTC out to Bob's specified withdrawal address. And this all happens somewhat autonomously thanks to the smart contract and the fact that all of these operations are being cryptographically proven and verified. So yeah, at a high level, this is how you can kind of visualize it. You've got two blockchains running in parallel, and then the one on top is the rollup chain. It has this two-way bridge, so you can transfer assets back and forth between the parent chain, in this case Bitcoin, and the rollup chain. And then every so often you'll get a block or a batch of blocks that gets put onto the parent chain along with a cryptographic validity proof that those batches are actually valid. Of course, if that proof resolves to false, it's not a valid proof, then the smart contract on layer 1 is going to reject it and just wait for a valid batch and proof to be provided before it goes to the next state transition. So yeah, at a high level, the features that you get with a validity rollup are that there are no interactivity or monitoring requirements for users. Receiving is not limited by any kind of channel capacity with a sender. Like I said, the UX is just like any other blockchain, not a channel-based system. You have high but not unlimited throughput, and we'll kind of get into the throughput numbers a little bit later. But you can kind of get this minimum best case of 35x transactions per second compared to transactions on layer 1. And by minimum best case, what I mean is you can compress transactions into a really small size, but then you can also do interesting things like cut through with a bunch of those transactions. So if you have a bunch of transactions that you can do a cut through for, you can get even higher throughput. But in the worst case scenario where you can't do any kind of cut through, but you have a full block of these transactions, you still get 35 times the transactions per second than what you can get on Bitcoin layer 1 today. You can also have custom execution environments. So I think this is really interesting because layer 1 is just accepting a validity proof. That validity proof could be for a generic, what's called a ZKVM, which enables you to have any kind of program on the other side of that. Some ZK VMs are like tailored towards specific languages, so a lot of the ones that are you see today are specifically for Rust, but you can basically prove any Rust program. And so you could have a validity rollup that like looks exactly like Bitcoin, or one that looks like Liquid, or one that looks like Rootstock, or one that looks like Zcash. Like if you have a kind of generic verifier on layer 1, the execution environment of the rollup can be like whatever you want, really. It's low cost for the parent chain nodes to verify because these cryptographic validity proofs verify they're not too much slower to verify than just an ECC signature, and they can be trustless. So which means that the funds cannot be frozen or stolen because everything is being cryptographically verified. Perhaps the most notable downside is that, at least today, they're relatively expensive to operate. Producing these cryptographically validity proofs can be quite expensive, but the costs are rapidly dropping just because people are really excited about this, pouring a lot of money into it, and like optimizing the hell out of these things. So that brings us to the quantum resistant rollups. And so what makes a rollup quantum resistant is that you can use like any post-quantum signature algorithm or proof to spend rollup coins. So if you're like a user of the system, the rollup could actually just implement natively a post-quantum signature algorithm, or even just say like, hey, provide a post-quantum proof, like a Stark, in order to spend your funds on the rollup. Like that can be the rule for like how you spend funds on the rollup. And then the second kind of aspect that's important to be post-quantum is the actual proof system for the proof that is going on layer 1. And so in that case, you depending on what your layer 1 supports in terms of the proof system, you could use any kind of post-quantum proof system, post-quantum Stark, or even there are some post-quantum Snark varieties that have been introduced. And that's what you would actually put in your checkpoint transaction that goes on layer 1, and that layer 1 is verifying. And there have been some proof of concepts of this already, showing how you can build like a Stark verifier in script using some additional opcodes that are not currently active on Bitcoin, which we'll get into later as well. So this is how, say, a quantum-resistant rollup would compare to some of the other post-quantum ways of like using Bitcoin. So we have a couple of these post-quantum signature algorithms which have been proposed for implementation directly in layer 1. These are the ones that BIP360 talks about, SLH DSA and MLDSA. And we can see that like the transaction sizes are quite stark in difference between the SLH DSA, MLDSA, and then the kind of like Stark or cryptographic proof-based systems, and it's not kind of a direct comparison because you can see this like little proof divided by n thing, and it's because the idea with these BitZip and QR rollup proposals, and I'm giving a talk about BitZip later if you want more context on that, but the idea is that you can, as I mentioned earlier, with rollups and also with BitZip, you can strip out a lot of information in the transaction that's made redundant by the cryptographic proof itself, primarily the witness, and that gets you transactions that can be as small as like 76 bytes. And in some cases, if you want an account-based system, it can get down even smaller. But in this case, the example is like using 1 in, 2 out UTXO-based transactions. And then you amortize the cost of the cryptographic validity proof over all of those transactions. So that's where you get this like proof divided by n, where n is the number of post-quantum transactions that you have in that block. But if your proof is like 100,000 bytes, and your, the raw transaction data itself that you're putting on chain is 76 bytes, then with a quantum resistant rollup, you could get 83.3 transactions per second, which is, more than 40 times what your biggest post-quantum signature on layer 1 would be. And then on the future-proof side of things, what I mean by future-proof is like, if we implemented the first two, post-quantum signature algorithms directly on Bitcoin layer 1, and then something, some tech advancement came along that made them better, or maybe there was a bug that was found in the implementation or something like that, like we would actually have to do a consensus change in order to adopt the new technology or fix the bug. Whereas with rollups, one of the things I think is interesting about rollups is that different rollups can implement different things. And if you have a generic enough verifier on layer 1, you could have this free experimentation at the rollup layer where different rollups kind of optimize for different things, or are taking different kinds of trade-offs. Like maybe some go with the lattice-based stuff, some go with the hash-based stuff. And if you find issues in one system, you can kind of fix them in another system, and you don't need to make any changes directly to layer 1, unless the proofs that you're actually putting on layer 1 have bugs. But if those are solid and you're just kind of doing experiments at the rollup layer and one of those has a problem, then you can kind of just fix that by creating a new rollup with the fix implemented. So it has an aspect of future proof to it that the other proposals do not, that I think is interesting. And then there's one more that I added here, which is shielded CSV, which I think has a lot in common with the rollup proposals, but with this, you can actually get transactions size, like the size of data that goes on layer 1, down to as small as 64 bytes per transaction. But you also, which increases your transactions per second to about 104 transactions per second. It also provides really great privacy. By default, you kind of get strong privacy for free. And it also has this nice future-proof aspect to it where, if something is wrong with your signature algorithm that you're using for sending transactions, or you just find a better, maybe more space efficient, or whatever you're optimizing for kind of system, you can just deploy another implementation of shielded CSV and with those improvements. So that's how I would compare the different kind of proposals that are floating around. Again, I'm going to be giving a presentation about BitZip later, so come back for that if you're interested in hearing about that. And so some action items that I would leave for the Bitcoin community if this sounds interesting to you. So in order to kind of get all of these benefits that I'm talking about with quantum resistant rollups, we need to disable key path spends. For example, BIP360, I think, proposes to do this. We have to have some kind of ability to verify zero-knowledge proofs, or at least post-quantum validity proofs on Bitcoin layer 1. And one way to do that is by having opcat and opmol. You put those together and you can get pretty space efficient validity proof verification scripts on Bitcoin layer 1. And you could also have something like op proof verify, which would be an opcode on Bitcoin layer 1 that's specifically tailored to verifying a specific kind of proof system. That opens questions of which proof system, and that would probably be endlessly bike sheddable. So I tend to prefer the more generic kind of approach of like opcat, not mol, where people kind of have the freedom to build what kind of verifier they want, but it's ultimately up to the community to decide what to do there. And then some things that would be like very nice to have, but not strictly necessary, would be like big integer arithmetic specifically, and optx or some other kind of like space efficient recursive covenant opcodes, so that we don't have to do unholy things in script to make recursive covenants work with opcat. So yeah, these are some of the references that I pulled from to come up with the numbers that I presented today. I'm happy to kind of dig into those if anyone has questions. And yeah, I want to leave some time for questions if anyone has questions.
Okay, so I wonder if this proposal is sort of putting the cart before the horse, if you will, because you have to presumably peg in Bitcoin to some on-chain address that's then used in this off-chain blockchain. So how do we secure the on-chain address to be quantum resistant?
Yeah, so first, like I said, we have to disable key path spends. So that way we restrict spending from that address to the script path. And then the script would be this validity proof verifier script. So that in order to spend from the address, you have to supply a validity proof that the program that is being proven is being satisfied. And this program is like the consensus rules of the rollup. And so as long as you can provide a validity proof that proves that that's valid, and then proves other conditions of the script are being satisfied, like for example, if the script is holding 10 Bitcoin and you're trying to withdraw 5 Bitcoin from the rollup, it would be sensible, let's say, to have also an additional requirement that you send the change back to the address. So there's no signatures. It's just a proof. It's just a cryptographic proof.
In your comparison, you had shielded CSV sneak in at the last point.
Yep.
Could you perhaps, in a couple sentences, put it in the context of rollups? How does it compare or not compare? Is it also quantum safe? And what are the other trade-offs? Like, why would you put it in this table, but why didn't it fit into your talk, basically?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, I was invited to talk about quantum resistant rollups primarily, but I didn't want to leave it out because it is, I think, a valid proposal or solution to how we could help make Bitcoin post-quantum. And so the idea with shielded CSV is similarly to a rollup, you need some kind of bridge to like get Bitcoin into this system where transactions are primarily happening off-chain. But the idea is that users will transfer their BTC into this system, and then they receive their shielded CSV node will detect that they have received a deposit, and then they are able to create a cryptographic proof that they own these coins, and they can transfer them to somebody else. But instead of broadcasting that transaction to a peer-to-peer network, and then all of that transaction data eventually goes on chain, instead what they do is they produce a nullifier to nullify the coin, and they put that on chain, and then they send a bundle of data off chain to the recipient that says, hey, I just spent this coin, here's the nullifier to prove that it's I haven't double spent it, it's on layer 1, and I'm giving you a cryptographic validity proof that the coin that I'm giving you corresponds to that nullifier, and that coin hasn't been double spent. And so the bulk of the data of the transaction is actually transferred off-chain. So that 64 bytes that I talk about that goes on-chain, this is locked. The 64 bytes that I say goes on-chain is just that nullifier. The rest of the transaction data gets transferred off-chain. And the way that it can be post-quantum is that like the encryption that you're using to encrypt the transaction details to the recipient can use post-quantum cryptography, and the proving system that you use to produce the cryptographic validity proofs that proves that your transaction is valid and the coins haven't been double spent and everything, that can also be post-quantum. And yeah, one of the nice things is that Bitcoin itself is mostly blind to everything that's happening. All it sees is the Bitcoin that goes into the system and out of the system, and then it has to keep track of these nullifiers. Well, Bitcoin doesn't keep track of the nullifiers, but you store the nullifiers in like a Taproot witness or something.
One more question.
Hey, so I'm, as somebody who works for a mining company, I'm constantly thinking like, how does this benefit miners? And if it does benefit miners, that makes it easier to sell because it's incentive compatible with miners, right? And so I kind of want to get your feeling on BitZip versus rollups versus like in terms of how they benefit miners.
Yeah. Well, BitZip, and I'll talk more about it in my upcoming talk. But BitZip BitZip transactions basically just look like Bitcoin transactions. There could maybe be scope for like expanding the kinds of things that BitZip transactions can do compared to normal Bitcoin script. That's maybe a community decision, not something I can say like is a for sure guaranteed outcome. But rollup transactions tend to be, again, it also kind of depends on what kind of verifier you enable on Bitcoin layer 1. But certainly the kinds of rollups that people today are building are like more expressive, and so you can just do more things with your Bitcoin. And I think it's nothing that I can guarantee, right? But like I think it's likely that if people can do more things with their Bitcoin, you have more use cases that's going to generate more fees for miners. And all else being equal. And so that's maybe one way, but I think ultimately it just depends on how people end up using these things. I don't know, maybe you get a kind of induced demand effect due to the fact that you can fit more transactions on chain, but yeah, it just depends on how users end up behaving and using these things.
So increasing utility and inducing demand, like having more supply of transaction TPS, right? Like all that's could help concentrate fees into the hands of miners. I just like the validity rollups. I would imagine like probably wouldn't share as much in fees with because like they operate in their own system, right?
Yeah, so there are kind of fees happening at two different levels. One is like the block producers on the validity rollup. In some cases, it's a central party or like a federation, but there are also these things called based rollups where the layer 1 miners themselves are actually doing the block production on the rollup. And so in that case, the fees from layer 1 and the fees from layer 2 would kind of like, both go to miners. But even in the case where you have a single party or a federation or something like that, a separate set of block producers for the rollup, they have to pay transaction fees to put the rollup data on chain and to pay for the operation of the script. So, and of course, if there are multiple rollups, then they're kind of bidding against each other, and of course, all other users of Bitcoin to like get their transactions included. So it's not like they're totally siphoning fees away from the miners either.
Good. That's a good mental model. Thank you.
Give it up for Light. All right, continuing to our next conversation about L2s, we got a panel quantum resistant sidechains. So Vakash moderating, and then we got Joe Ross and Mike Casey. How long do you think you guys?
All right, we're good to go. All right, I'll kick us off here. Good morning, everyone. Excited to be, I guess, moderating a panel today about quantum-resistant sidechains, which I think is a natural progression, given that we just talked about roll-ups in the previous talk. I'll kick us off with just a very, very quick sidechain introduction for people that don't know, and then would love to dig deeper into the space of solutions for how sidechains and post-quantum resistance in Bitcoin intersect. So the Blockstream released the sidechain paper in 2014. Initially, that was the Liquid network. It is the Liquid network. This is a design of another chain, right, that is pegged to the Bitcoin blockchain. The initial model was a federated multi-sig sort of custody model. And one key property is that it has its own consensus mechanism. So this is distinctly not proof of work. There is its own consensus. The opcodes are basically cloned from Bitcoin Core, the Elements code base, but there are opcodes in the Liquid network that are not there. There are properties of sidechains that are not there in Bitcoin Core, like confidential transactions, that sort of stuff. So basically, scalability and privacy sort of blended solution. So that's a quick introduction to sidechains. I'll basically I guess, the first question we could start is in the QBTC solution. I don't think the audience is very familiar. Now that we just spoke a little bit about Liquid, what does your solution look like? What was your inspiration in thinking about sidechains as a potential avenue for post-quantum resistance on Bitcoin?
Yeah, so we've been looking at the quantum issue for a couple of years now, the leadership of our company. And one of the concerns was, as we've discussed this during this summit, is that there simply may not be enough time to achieve full consensus on mainnet prior to a quantum attack. So we thought about what can we do? What can we make happen in this time? What can we do without having to get consensus on mainnet? And the answer to that was a sidechain. So we built QBTC. It is a proof of work sidechain. It pretty much models Bitcoin's UTXO structure. It's very, very familiar. It's got Nakamoto style consensus, merge mining. It's got a federated one-to-one peg. There's no extra token, nothing like that. The real purpose of it, though, is that there is an option to transact securely in the quantum era in the event that Bitcoin does not achieve consensus in time.
Got it. So maybe one interesting question, you had a lot there to unpack, is this also came up in the last panel, which is the bridging mechanism. If we don't have some sort of post-quantum verification on Bitcoin layer 1, how do you think about bridge security and the extent to which the script entering your sidechain is secure?
Yeah, so bridging is a very tough issue. We get that. We've been talking with Mike and the Enduro team about integrating with them and using their bridge. They've got some really, really interesting ways of handling it on mainnet.
Yeah, if I can elaborate. So let me introduce myself. So I'm Mike Casey. I'm Director of Engineering for Meritech, and I'm the Chief Architect of the Enduro platform. Enduro is not a sidechain. It is a sidechain platform. And it is much like Liquid sidechain. I refer to it as it's as if Liquid and Rootstock had a baby. Because it's actually a hybrid federation and merge mine chain with at minimum 80% of all revenues going to the miners. So it is not a cartel, much the same way I would view Liquid as, of people who just collect money. No, it's designed to send extra revenue to the miners and to give increased capabilities to Bitcoin that it cannot through the use of side chains, which are effectively other layer ones. So think parallel layer ones, not necessarily layer 2. So, and then the most important part is the bridge. Mara, as you may know, we are the world's largest single entity miner, and we can operate a all of Anduro primary assets are one-to-one pegged with Bitcoin. There is no other asset. We're not doing fundraisers, no token raises, no crowd sales, no nothing. It's just Bitcoin, proxy Bitcoin with another asset. So, and the fees, as mentioned, by and large, go to the miners. So the point of this is to get the miners paid, get more fee revenue for miners so we can increase Bitcoin security budget. So the other thing about, we run our own pool. We are, I think at present, the 6th largest pool in Bitcoin. And what that means is, specifically from a quantum standpoint, we also run Slipstream. How many people here know what Slipstream is? Okay, that's good. So Slipstream, of course, famously, it's good for JPEGs and op returns, but it's also good for private transactions if you don't want to be sniped in a short-range attack. So we can actually affect a quantum-resistant bridge, provided, trust me, bro, the miner's not going to quantum attack you. You can just use Slipstream directly and peg it off onto the quantum-resistant sidechain. I don't want to take up too much time, but so we currently have 2 sidechains that are on testnet beta. Alice, which we hope to make quantum resistant, and we're actually implementing actively BIP360 into Coordinate as it progresses. So we hope to go live by the end of the year on mainnet with Coordinate and integrate as soon as it is ready BIP360 into it, along with a signet of BIP360 on the Bitcoin side that we may eventually turn into a full-fledged testnet. Sorry.
No, thank you. That was
a lot.
very helpful. No, it was very helpful in terms of unpacking some of those things. So I think the next thing I was actually going to get into, you actually already talked about, which is the consensus on the sidechain and how you think about consensus on the sidechain and different payoffs and incentives, basically to the miners. So yeah, just curious as to how you guys think about what, if there was a point of quantum sidechain, why a certain consensus would be selected.
Yeah, we modeled it after Bitcoin. You know, Bitcoin's consensus model works. We've been talking with Mike and them about using merge mining. We want to continue to support the miners. You know, the amount of money that miners have into hardware and infrastructure is pretty significant, so we want to make sure we continue to support that and make sure that they have a viable path forward. Yeah.
And to me, that question is vital, right? Because if we do go with a roll-up centric solution, if you look at what's happened in Ethereum, which has been overtaken with roll-ups, none of that goes back to supporting the security budget of the L1. It is all distributed out, and they're floundering because of it. They've completely kind of destroyed themselves with a couple of the decisions they made recently because they can't sustain the L1. And if we do not provide a security budget and everything moves off onto these roll-ups, then the miners will starve for fees and things get ugly.
Would you guys be able to provide just a very quick overview of merge mining for the audience that may not know what merge mining is?
Sure. Merge mining is the other aspect. People who don't know what sidechains, because they've fallen out of favor, they're a very old concept. Merge mining is even rarer to find people who actually understand merge mining. But it was proposed by Satoshi. He actually proposed merge mining for something called BitDNS, which eventually became Namecoin. But in his explanation of it is probably the best one I've ever heard. It's the most succinct. So you take a Bitcoin block, right? But that block has an extension on it that has proof data for another block. So this block is considered valid for both chains. But because of so the other chain uses Bitcoin valid as its consensus mechanism as well. It's valid for Bitcoin, it's valid for my chain. But it can do so at a lower difficulty. So you can actually have a subset of the miners mine these blocks, merge mining, and collect fees on the sidechain even when they don't win a Bitcoin block. So it allows miners to reuse otherwise wasted hashes, right, and actually get profit from them. Of course, this is paid out in the sidechain asset. And the other component is if you have a link one-to-one, then that asset is also redeemable and, in fact, is proxy Bitcoin. It's actual Bitcoin that you're still mining, not Namecoin or something else. So if you add all that together, so Satoshi's actually, if you break the branch, so if you break the branch off and submit the Bitcoin section with the proof, most people think it's about anchoring, and anchoring is not what merge mining does. It is a side effect. You are including something in there, but it's actually the fact that you're using Bitcoin's proof of work for a valid sidechain block that makes it valid, not the anchor. So it's not about anchoring and using Bitcoin security. That's not what it is at all. So that's a high overview of merge mining. Happy to take any questions after.
Awesome. Do you have anything to add on that?
Nope.
Okay. Okay, got it. So in terms of the anticipated flow or use case, right? And in terms, you're saying that you want to give people an option to secure their Bitcoin independent of what happens in Bitcoin layer 1, basically protocol discussions, right? Whether it's BIP360, commit reveal, right? Hourglass, all of these things are on the Bitcoin core, kind of layer 1 landscape. Inherently, in these solutions that you're describing, the Bitcoin that's on these side chains is pegged one-to-one to Bitcoin, correct?
Yep.
So in terms of the game theory, right, where you have, let's say, a quantum hack to the Bitcoin layer 1 before any upgrades actually happen, right, and the price of Bitcoin drops because of that, right? Or the price of Bitcoin is subject to market forces with Satoshi moving coins. Something goes on, right? It is true that the QBTC that's on these sidechains would basically also fall, right? So how do you think about those trade-offs? So curious, this is just, one thing I was thinking about when it comes to the game theory of what you're protecting against on this sidechain.
That's a tough question to answer. We hope to secure the value as best as possible, but really it's going to depend on how the attack looks like, what happens. The bottom line is we don't really know. We want to obviously keep everything as good as it can be. The one thing we've done is we know that it's really tough to get a lot of people to bridge over. One of the big problems that the L2s and the side chains have had up to this point is getting TVL. Nobody uses them. We've seen that happen over and over and over. We've talked to a lot of institutions and stakeholders in the industry about QBTC, and they really like the idea of it, but they say, we can't move our clients' funds over. We can't bridge our ETF over. We can't bridge our funds in custody over. So what we're doing is we're doing something kind of similar to the commit reveal or a pre-commit, where you can sign a message on QBTC with your ECDSA keys prior to Q-Day that ties your ECDSA keys to a post-quantum key. That way, before Q-Day hits, we have a kind of proven record, a proven history of who the rightful owner is of those coins. Then after Q-Day hits, that still allows for a way for people to move their coins over in a secure manner, knowing that those coins were not stolen.
Got it. So that's under the assumption that the quantum hacker did not already steal those coins, right?
Yeah.
So you'd have to basically commit, and then when Q-Day has happened, you basically have your chance to go to your sidechain, and then the verification happens that those were you were the rightful owner of those coins.
Yep.
Got it. Do you have anything to add on that?
Well, we just had a panel discussion on that very subject, but I think there's two major subjects in quantum. One is the wider scale, what do you do with vulnerable coins? The other one is, how do we actually activate a quantum-resistant scheme? Because remember, it's been at this point, 7 years since Taproot? Do we even know how to do that anymore? I don't know. So to garner support and to try to get a viable version that we know, what we can do is we can activate it, yes, of course, through a SIGNet route, but we've activated a bunch of different SIGNets now with a bunch of different proposals, and none of them are making it anywhere near to consensus. But specifically, if we activate a side chain that has an active instance of BIP360 that you can use with real Bitcoin, well, then people can get comfortable testing it and making sure, yes, this actually works, this actually fits my needs, and then we can help garner consensus to implement it on Bitcoin for real.
Got it. No, thank you. That was helpful. So we talked about these scenarios in which you're bridging to the sidechain, and the point is that you're not really sure what happens on kind of regular Bitcoin or the L1, right? In a scenario where we go through with one of these paths, BIP360, commit reveal, basically Hourglass, one or more of these things, what do you see the value of quantum sidechain in that case? Like in a world where Bitcoin migrates, do you still see value in that? How do you think about that?
I saw value in it. Personally, I saw value in it long before we implemented the quantum stuff, because there's a number of other features in Coordinate that actually make it much more easier for payments than Bitcoin, because you can actually utilize the Federation consensus to make things faster and easier and cheaper. And also some other features that, I implemented a very interesting scheme for reverse auctions for fees. these are things that would help make it a payment, and some of these might leak back into Bitcoin one day. But there's value to sidechains other than just Quantum. That's why Enduro is a multi-tenant sidechain. It's to have sidechains for use cases, and all of them pay back the miners.
Yeah, just like Mike was saying, that even if the primary purpose of this doesn't end up being quantum, protection against mainnet, there's so much we can do. There's the ability to rapidly deploy really cool features, DeFi stable coins, Bitcoin-backed stable coin, kind of like DAI on Ethereum. There's a lot of things you can do and rapidly prototype, deploy, and get out in the real world that users want to use. And it brings the fees back to the miners. They can do it in a quantum safe manner. So there's a lot of ways that we can use these side chains other than just protecting the value of Bitcoin.
And anything that's transacted on it does generate for the Bitcoin security budget. So that's helpful.
Got it. So I think one last thing on my end before we either leave it to the audience or you guys can basically say, closing thoughts or comments here, is just to give us a timeline of where you are with what you're building, what to expect in the next 12, 24 months as a quick snapshot of just where the products and infrastructure stand here.
So as for us, we are building out the network actively. We anticipate a mainnet launch of Coordinate with or without BIP360, depending on state, by the end of the year. BIP360, how are we coming on that, Hunter? Yeah. So yes, so we anticipate a launch of BIP360 somewhere around that time frame. Hard at work there, and so the Coordinate and also the Alice network is going to follow on shortly thereafter, and that's the EVM variant. Yeah.
We have our DevNet live right now. We've got a mobile wallet demo as well. If you all want to check it out, see me after the talk. I'll let you send some coins around. It's in production actively. We're looking at probably like a Q2 launch next year as well, so similar time frames. The code is open source on GitHub. Check it out. We made it live during the Vegas conference about a month ago. So check it out, collaborate with us, tear it apart, have fun.
And we currently have deployed a testnet version of both Coordinate and Alice. Feel free to check them out. We will be integrating BIP360 as soon as it becomes available. Also, we'll have a BIP360 SIGNet up, so you can check it with an actual Bitcoin client.
Awesome. Well, that's enough for my questions. Yeah, we'd love to open it to the audience if we have time.
Does anybody have any questions? Okay, let's get a round of applause. So here is the plan. We have 3 talks left. There's going to be a break now for mandatory coffee break, essentially. So get as much of that as you need. And then we'll start it back up close to 11. So do what you got to do. And then we have 3 talks after that. We close it out. We got a picnic sponsored by Localhost. The sun will probably be out, hopefully. And it's just a great day. It's a great day to be a day. So looking forward to it.
relatively quickly so we can ask questions. Okay, motivation. I mean, look, I guess just to summarize all the threat stuff from yesterday, at a very high level, cryptocurrency and Bitcoin is unique because you authorize your own spending. It is a bearer asset, right? Banks do your transaction for you in the traditional financial system. So if we have a quantum computer out there, someone else can authorize spending for you, right? So it calls into question this entire idea of who owns a Bitcoin if someone else can spend my Bitcoin, right? So the other way to term this, what I'm describing, is self-sovereignty, right? So this is the term that I like the most. Cryptocurrency generally, and Bitcoin obviously in a specific case, is defined by self-sovereignty, right? Obviously there's decentralization and a bunch of other things, but self-sovereignty is fundamentally the principle that's being violated here, right? And I think the first order of business is to tackle that problem. So a lot of people, I think, at this talk, or in the past several talks, we've talked a lot about protocol stuff and different things we should do, BIPs, etc. That is great. But I think I just put this up here. Sorry, this is like very primitive slide making technique here, but hopefully you can get the point. There's going to be a lot of effort beyond just fixing the protocol. I think it can be very easy to fixate on the protocol and what needs to fix and which signature schemes, but we have to remember that beyond the protocol, there's an entire stack and a galaxy of applications that all have to accommodate whatever changes are made at the low level, and also ultimately have to migrate to a new scheme, right? So I think an analogy that some people have talked about previously is Taproot, right? Taproot, I think personally, is a really great addition to Bitcoin. Obviously, it sounds like very likely it will have to change, but just taking that upgrade for what it is, most Bitcoin users do not use it, right? And that is very, very different from what will have to happen here. As we heard from Jameson and the debate around what to do with Satoshi's coins, not adopting an upgrade like this is a fundamental security vulnerability that impacts not only the individual's assets, but everyone around them. So at Project 11, we're kind of more focused on this level, right? Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen to the protocol, and we're, of course, not independent of the protocol in any way, shape, or form. But Yellow Pages is really kind of focused on building wallet infrastructure is the best way to think of it for the ultimate migration to a post-quantum scheme. And when I go through, like I said, this is all live, so when I go through, you'll kind of see a flow that you're going to recognize because you're like, oh, this kind of looks like a wallet. And it is kind of what it is. Okay, so with that, let's go through a walkthrough of the product. Okay, fundamentally, the idea here is we have a key, your existing ECDSA key that authorizes spending of your Bitcoin UTXO, and that key can obviously is vulnerable from a quantum attacker. If a quantum computer shows up right now, there is no cryptographic way to prove ownership over anything, right? Because again, a quantum computer can recover a private key in a totally non-attributional way, and so therefore a digital signature using ECDSA means nothing, right? So what we need to do, going back to the kind of the problem, self-sovereignty has been violated, so that's your ability to prove that you own an asset. We need to enable individuals to recover their self-sovereignty. And so this is what we do here. So basically, Yellow Pages is a way to generate a new post-quantum key pair. We actually, technically under the hood, as you'll see in a minute, we generate 2 post-quantum schemes, because as you guys probably recall from yesterday, there's really 2 leading candidates, MLDSA and SLHDSA, and we can talk more about that in a minute. But you generate effectively 2 keys from a single seed phrase. You sign a message with those post-quantum keys, and then you bind that to your ECDSA signature. Now, there's a little bit of extra engineering that has to go into proving that's a valid signature without doxing yourself and your public key, and we'll talk about that. But fundamentally, at a high level, this is the sketch of Yellow Pages, right? And so this is more or less what I talked about right here. I think one thing to note, and again, we'll get into this in a little bit more detail a bit later, this is not just post-quantum at the level of the Bitcoin protocol, or like at the level of signatures, right? So as I think one of the presentations mentioned yesterday, there's a whole bunch of implications to quantum computing, or like for a quantum adversary across the stack, right? And so in our case, you're using, like I mentioned a second ago, there's some extra engineering that has to go into not revealing your public key. We use to do that a trusted execution environment, which is on a server that is remote to the client. So we need to ensure that client-server connection is secure, right? So we use MLChem, which is the lattice-based key encapsulation mechanism to basically ensure there's a secure connection between the enclave on the server and the client side, right? And so this is really, I think, to my knowledge, the first deployed infrastructure for wallets that uses hybrid post-quantum cryptography. Okay, cool. So maybe let's just get into the flow here, and then we'll go dive into details, and we'll take questions. Okay, so like I said, like I previewed, what does this look like? So first off, you need to generate a key, right? You need to generate key pair. So I think the only thing to note here is that, again, as I mentioned a second ago, we use a single seed phrase to generate two separate keys. We use both MLDSA and SLHDSA. We're going to get to the limitations of what this is a little bit later, but I just want to say at a very high level, the approach here is to try and remain as flexible as possible because we really don't know fundamentally which of these approaches are going to work. Like I said, we have ideas that some of these might work, but for a variety of reasons, either SLHDSA or MLDSA may just not be viable. So in any event, so we let users here generate a key pair, and then you verify your seed. And then this is kind of where, inside this is blurred out because this is someone going through the actual flow here. But here you generate a signature using the new key, two signatures using the new keys that you just generated, and then you sign basically with your Bitcoin key, right? Now that signature, again, as I mentioned a second ago, is done on the enclave. So it's done remote in a trusted execution environment privately. So you're not revealing your public key to anyone. And by the way, I should mention, I don't think I had... Yeah, so I kind of glossed over, so what you just saw is kind of the front end. I glossed over the back end, which is currently, I know, drum roll, very exciting, a database, right? So the current back end is a database. Yes, I know it's disappointing, and we'll talk about how that might change in future iterations of the Yellow Pages. But bottom line is, the claim sits on a database, and the public key does not sit there for your Bitcoin. Your proof sits there. So the TEE, which is, basically you get this back once you sign your Bitcoin. Once you sign in your Bitcoin wallet, I used Electrum there, and this giant bunch of text is basically an attestation from the execution environment that the logic you provided executed correctly, right? So this is a proof, basically, that a signature was valid for a Bitcoin public key without revealing which one. Okay, so that's it. That in its simplest form is the Yellow Pages. So some technical notes. So yeah, like I said, we use MLChem to ensure like a hybrid encryption, or hybrid post-quantum security for the connection with the TEE. And again, just to iterate, this is the workflow. I think it missed. There's like a couple things that didn't render, but this is at a very high level the workflow inside the TEE, right? So again, the TEE is really just providing privacy here and ensuring that you're not leaking your public key, right? And then ultimately it is returning an attestation. And it's maybe important to emphasize, and we have a whole blog post, which by the way, on our blog, we have everything that I'm going to present to you is the iceberg tops of what we've written on our blog in terms of technical explanation. But one thing I will say about TEEs and using them is most often in production, TEEs are used blindly, which is to mean they are not, you're just trusting the hardware without the attestation, right? So here you actually have an attestation that's returned, which is again the proof that the claim was valid, which is in this case that the signature is valid. Cool. I talked about MLChem already, and like I said, in general, in the future, for any server client, type work, this is going to be required for basically any kind of crypto infrastructure. Cool. And then we also have created our own address type. Why did we create our own address type and not use something that pre-exists? Well, because nothing really pre-exists yet. And by the way, this is not necessarily implying that the address type that we created will be the standard of the future Bitcoin. But that said, I think it was an interesting exercise, and we learned a lot of interesting things in actually implementing this, right, and applying some of these standards that I've mentioned up here, BEC32M, BIP32, on actually generating these addresses. And by the way, just maybe as like a side note, I think this is mentioned yesterday, but potentially just worth reemphasizing. Signatures for Sphinx certainly are huge, right? And so unless you do something, you have like it's from like, forget the blockchain bloat, just like from the UI level, gigantic string. We have a blog post where you have like a little side scrolling thing, and you can go for a long time to get to the end of the signature. Public keys for MLDSA are long. They're 10 times longer than a ECDSA public key. So again, for the UX and the readability, from a UX and readability standpoint, ideally you'd like to address those problems. So yeah, that's what we did. And again, we have a whole blog post that covers this if you guys are interested. Okay, future directions. So like I mentioned a second ago, we have a very exciting backend database Postgres database that currently hosts all the claims. I'm sorry, that's going to be the next slide. So currently we use the TEE. So, TEE has drawbacks, right? On the one hand, it's pretty widely deployed and for many applications is suitable for privacy preservation. But there is an additional assumption of censorship, right? So theoretically, Evervault, who's the provider we use, and they use AWS Nitro enclaves, in case you're wondering. Could go offline. And if they go offline, then you're not going to be able to generate an attestation. So kind of it would be nice to consider a way to be able to generate a proof client side, right? And so I know some people in this room I know have worked previously or are familiar with zero knowledge cryptography, and I think some of that was the topic of Light's presentation earlier. But there's a way, you can use that same approach to generate a proof of a valid signature on the client side. By the way, it's actually, just as a side note, Google Wallet actually has this also rolled out in production for age verification, which is kind of interesting. So this is like getting to be more of a production-ready technology, and I think could be a very good fit for this. And the nice thing about doing that is you no longer have the assumption of liveness for generating the proof, right, for the server, right? What is the trade-off? Speaking as someone who's worked on zero-knowledge cryptography for 5 years, it's complex, right? So there's a lot of implementation complexity. And this is a theme that I'm going to return to at the end of my talk. But I think the question is, for this use case, is it worth it? It's a question we're contemplating. For now, like I said, I think the TEE is a pretty solid starting point. Okay, this is what I was going to say a second ago. The exciting database. Obviously, that's not, we're all here because we're, believe in permissionlessness. Databases aren't really permissionless. So what do we do about that? Well, there's a bunch of things you could do with this, right? So fundamentally, what are we doing here? What is this claim? What are these claims? Like, what does this database look like? It's basically just mapping your old ECDSA addresses or UTXOs to some new address, which is kind of arbitrary because we defined it in this case. But this is all it is a mapping, right? What's another mapping? Well, I mean, arguably UTXOs are a form of mapping, right? There's like, public key amount, right? So there's a way where you could actually consider potentially decentralizing this whole thing. So that's kind of the extreme one side. You just could turn this backend somehow into a put it on or create a decentralized ledger just for this. Or alternatively, you could you could hash this database and put a digest on the Bitcoin blockchain and then provide some way for people to verify that, hey, the database that I'm interacting with is actually the one that is live and that is kind of canonical, right? So there's a whole bunch of ways that you could potentially imagine decreasing the trust assumption, which is currently entirely on Project 11, right? So Project 11 is hosting this database. Its availability depends on us. But there's a bunch of ways that are, I think, relatively straightforward and easy to implement to make this kind of more robust. And I think that's probably a little bit more of an interesting direction initially for us than going down the road of ZK. Cool. The other thing, limitation of this is, and a potential evolution of it, is it would be great to support different address types. Right now, we support pay to public key hash and pay to witness public key hash. What's great about that? Well, 98% of transactions today are of these two types. What's bad about that? Well, as we learned yesterday, there's a bunch of people with exposed public keys and a bunch of the, $600 million or $600 billion worth of Bitcoin is not under these address types. So it kind of doesn't really do much for a lot of the coins that are actually affected. So it would be nice to be able to expand this potentially into a world where it's supported different address types. Like, for example, and kind of one, I was in the last bullet, one kind of interesting idea here about this is you can imagine this is what, and hopefully it's obvious by this point, this is an entirely off-chain mechanism, right? So this has nothing to do really with the Bitcoin blockchain necessarily. This is like just on top of it. But one thing you could do theoretically, if you're Satoshi, let's say, and we supported P2PK, you could potentially use this to create a heartbeat for yourself, right? So you can effectively have like a heartbeat, which is a claim that is not on chain at all, doesn't reveal anything, right? But it proves that you're alive and there. And maybe you don't want to move anything right away. You're waiting for the evolution of PQ or whatnot. But fundamentally, it provides a way for people who may be exposed to basically say that they actually own the coins without doing anything on chain. And I think the earlier debates today, there's a lot of discussion around how do we know what the line is between who owns something and who's lost something, or who's lost a coin versus who's just not around or is not paying attention. Cool. Yeah, I think this has been covered in depth, but for anyone who's interested, we also maintain a live list of public keys that have been either reused or are just exposed in some way, shape, or form. Someone asked the question the other day, I think maybe it was Peter, I don't know if he's here, but this does not include like the side channels or the multitude of other ways you could reveal a public key, right? So this is, I think as was covered yesterday, this is kind of like the best case scenario in terms of if only these public keys are exposed, like, you know, I don't want to say good, but this is like kind of like the most optimistic case. Obviously, most likely there are other public keys exposed we don't know about. Okay, cool. I'm just running about right on time. So let's finish up here. Okay, changing Bitcoin is going to take years. I think we heard from Clara yesterday, her estimates, right? And as I highlighted earlier with my very artistic blocks in layers, my layer cake, there's multiple layers of things that have to migrate. And with each of those things, there are parties and stakeholders that will have opinions, right? And so just like we, in the process of this weekend, or this, the end of this week, have kind of moved forward in forming consensus among our group here, that's all got to happen again and again and again and again at every single layer. So I don't think this is a controversial statement to say that this is going to take years. There's never been an upgraded Bitcoin like this. I don't think we should kid ourselves and pretend like this is guaranteed to succeed, this broad effort to make Bitcoin PQ secure. The challenge is enormous, right? And I think, that's just something that we just have to keep in our minds, right? And what if this upgrade fails, or what if something, what if it forks? What if there are multiple upgrade paths? Like, what do we do, right? So all of these are questions that we don't have answers to because we're just beginning this discussion, right? And so what Yellow Pages is the only production ready and live way today to prove in a post-quantum secure way that you own your Bitcoin, right? That's all it's doing. It doesn't protect you from a post-quantum adversary, but it's letting you generate a cryptographic proof. It's really a social proof that's backed up with a cryptographic proof that you own some Bitcoin at some time. Okay, what does it not do? Well, I already highlighted a little bit that this is not a shield against a quantum computer, right? Really, the motivation of this is providing the minimum viable way, the minimum viable social claim, so as we don't have to all rely on arbitrary claims of ownership after Q-Day. Yeah, cool. I think I covered the other stuff. I think the last thing I'll say in terms of caveats, and maybe this is less of a caveat for Yellow Pages, but just more of a general statement, complexity. So I think one thing, so going back, let's see, let me go all the way back here. Okay, so we need to keep in mind, and this is something that I've learned personally from developing Yellow Pages, is we need to keep in mind that complexity only increases up the stack, right? And so I think there are a lot of great ideas that get introduced in the isolation of like a protocol discussion or a Bitcoin mailing list. And these ideas seem like they're going to make things at the low level very simple, but ultimately, potentially, make implementing this very difficult. Let me give like 2 examples quickly. So one is, I think Hunter mentioned a little while ago or yesterday that they had initially considered Falcon as a post-quantum scheme. And why consider Falcon? Well, Falcon actually has the best performance characteristics. Small signatures, it's relatively fast, small public key size. So why not use Falcon? Well, as he mentioned, this requires every single wallet out there to implement floating point cryptography, which go find any cryptographer that you know and ask them about that, and there's someone shaking their head. Yes, this is like big no-no. You do not want to do this if you can at all help it, right? So again, this is like a solution at the theoretical protocol level that actually kind of sucks in the real world, which is why I thought rightfully went away from that, right? But this is true of everything, right? And so yesterday we were kind of discussing, and I think there's a presentation on Sphinx around like, oh, we have different parameters, and maybe we should have like one parameter for certain transactions, another parameter for other transactions. And this is just a reminder that this complexity percolates up all the way through the stack. So theoretically, we can have 10 different parameter sets for Sphinx, for SLHDSA, for MLDSA. All that has to be accounted for at the wallet and infrastructure level, right? And so I think it's very, very easy to lose sight of, as working on the protocol, it's easy to lose sight of the cost and complexity for implementation as it goes up the stack. And for something like this use case, where again, $2.1 trillion is, 1.5 times the GDP of South Korea, right? Like, we have to be holistic when considering the potential security implications of any choice that we make. So, very proud of the work that we've done here, and I think it's sort of inspired some other folks. I know there's like some approaches around commit reveal that I think have been somewhat inspired by this, and happy that we have been able to contribute this. And when I say contribute this, I mean contribute. This is the QR code to our GitHub repository. Everything in here is open source. Everything that I presented is open source. As I said, it is live in production. I think on the first page, the QR code leads to the actual front-end app. And so you can give it a shot, try it yourself. We've had about, I think we're at 1,500 signups so far. And these are the folks, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge these guys, folks on my team who helped build this and make this a reality. And hopefully that can include some of you who are interested in potentially contributing. Like I said, these are all open source repositories. Okay, I have 6 minutes left for questions.
Cool. All right. Let's give a round of applause.
Hey, first, thanks so much for actually doing the work on trying to see what these different addresses and signatures look like, actually rendered on a screen and trying to encode them. I think it's easy to forget, like, oh, it's a 14K signature, but like, that's horrible. When you were talking about future work, 2 things that we've looked into that might be interesting for you guys. On the signature support thing, if you haven't looked at BIP 322, it's a standard that lets you do signatures for like a Bitcoin address where instead of signing a message, you actually sign a kind of a dummy Bitcoin transaction. And what's great is it works with like all address types. And the Ordinals community has built some tooling to let you like generate and download a PSBT, and then anything that can sign a PSBT will work. So that might just help with like wallet support for you guys if you haven't looked at it. And then
Very
the other
cool,
one
thanks.
is SP1 actually has WASM bindings.
This is the prover there. You're talking about the succinct prover for their ZKVM? Yeah.
Yep. So, okay, cool. If you've already seen it, great. If you guys want to do that client side, you can do it, WASM. But great work. Love the project.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of great, interesting primitives for ZK. And honestly, it's incredible just to see. Like I said, I worked in ZK primarily before coming here. And I think 7 years ago, no one thought this was going to be ever practical on a client. Now it really is, which is cool. But yeah, there's still a lot of complexity. So I think it's really just a matter of, is the trade-off worth it to invest more in this versus some other thing, like, for example, decentralizing the back end in some way, shape, or form. So, but thank you so much. I appreciate the feedback, and I'll check out BIP 322.
Yeah, on BIP 322, it's been a little unfinished, and I don't think the authors are working on it. So if someone wants to work on a message signing BIP, I think it's looking for a new author. The line to the end. So it is being used. It is the BIP itself is a little incomplete and could use a little more love. It needs basically a push over the finish line.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Any other questions? Max?
Could you clarify again what the proof consists of other than the attestation, and also whether it would allow proof of a particular, for example, pay to pub key hash?
Yeah, so so the proof is simply, let me go find I think I have it all grayed out, so you're not, oh no, you can see it here. So yeah, so there's the proof. It doesn't really mean anything in this format, but effectively the proof is saying that this is it's signed by the hardware itself, right? So Intel has its, AWS Nitro has its own valid TEE, and the proof is that the pay to public key hash or pay to witness public key hash signature is valid, right? So the underlying public key you sign and then verify. In order to verify, you need the actual raw public key. The public key hash, of course, doesn't work. So you're basically verifying that signature is valid without revealing it now on the actual claims database. If that makes sense. So if you do that, go for it. You had a question.
Yeah. So the P2PKH hash is included in this proof.
Yeah, so the hash does get included in the claim,
but not the pub key.
Not the pub key, which of course would dox you and expose you to a bunch of potential quantum attacker. Yes. Yahweh. Great question. I'm very glad you asked that. I'm glad
Can
no
you
one asked.
repeat the question for the live stream?
I will repeat it for everyone. So how are you doing timestamping? Hey Alex, this is all great, but what if I sign up for this and then send my Bitcoin away in the next block? That's a great question, right? So this currently does not contemplate any kind of, like, there's no guarantee around, like, from that point after the claim that you have the Bitcoin, right? This is a drawback of this approach currently. Now, you can imagine different ways to potentially incorporate this, for example, in existing wallets, where every time you send a transaction, potentially it automatically re-registers you in whatever claims backend. I think that's a really interesting way to apply something like this. But in this standalone example, there really is no guarantee that this is what it's giving you. This proof is a claim at time T, you own these assets, and that is it, right? Now, I think it still works for this worst case scenario that we're imagining, a quantum computer. You know, where's Terry? He left. He's left back working on his quantum computer. Anyway, Terry comes up with a quantum computer tomorrow, and we're all panicking. And I think we can always go back and pick an arbitrary time, and this will be a social consensus exercise again, but there's an arbitrary block height in which we're like, okay, we're pretty sure at this point nobody, had a quantum computer, so what are the claims that we know are valid at this time T? And we use this in kind of a social consensus mechanism to kind of recover ourselves, potentially. That's not a very satisfying answer, which is why it was a very good question. But I think that's one of the areas that I think we're kind of looking to apply this is with wallets and basically make this effectively be automated. So you're just always updating your claims to ensure that your assets are up to date. Great question. Light, go for it.
Last question.
Is that the primary way that you imagine this tool being used, is basically as a kind of recovery mechanism if a Q-Day hits sooner than people are able to kind of migrate?
Yes. And the disappointing answer to that question is yes, just because there's a lot. I mean, this is the disadvantage of kind of ignoring all the protocol stuff, right? It's like fundamentally, I create a new address type and we have these post-quantum signatures. Like, this doesn't move any money, right? So there's kind of like this inherent limitation to it. So really, this is kind of designed to be the minimum viable way where you as a user, as an owner, can retain self-sovereignty in the sense that you can cryptographically show that you own these assets, right? Which is something that goes away in the post-quantum world. So it's really, I think the intent is to make this as a recovery mechanism. Now, I think there's probably other ways to iterate this and make it something more than that. But at that, it starts to then bleed, obviously by necessity, down into the level of the protocol, or some protocol.
Thank you.
Awesome. Great questions, everybody. Thank you.
Just throw my finger on it if it goes. Alright, I got a lot of battery, so you'll be fine. Perfect. All right, 2 more talks, and then we get to go to a picnic.
Can you help me?
Hello.
No? Can't drag it? Can't get to the corner? Green. All right, great. So I mentioned BitZip in my last talk. This talk is about that. It's based on ideas that were originally published by Ethan Heilman. And it's basically about how do we deal with the size of post-quantum signatures if we were to implement post-quantum signatures in L1. So the main problem is that these post-quantum signatures are big. Like
really big. We use this, single small block to represent the size of a SEC P256K1 signature, specifically with ECDSA. And, we can see that these post-quantum signatures are in some cases like 30, 40 times bigger or more. And so if we do nothing with the Bitcoin block size limit, then that is going to inherently constrain throughput on Bitcoin layer 1 and reduce our transaction throughput, scalability. So BitZip is attempting to address this, basically preserve or potentially even improve throughput without having to increase the Bitcoin block size limit. So what if we just got rid of the signatures? It's kind of crazy sounding idea when you first encounter it. And so the next question, of course, is how? How do you do that? And so that's where BitZip comes into play. So what is BitZip? It one adds a new. You of course assumes a new post-quantum transaction type in Bitcoin layer 1, and then it adds a new block validity rule that says there cannot be any post-quantum keys or signatures in the block. Instead, we provide a single Stark proof that proves the validity of all of the post-quantum transactions that are included in the block. So this is not an anatomically correct representation of a Bitcoin block, but at a high level, you have a bunch of transactions. Those transactions essentially have two primary components, like the non-witness data and then the witness data. A little bit of a glitch. And then BitZip kind of changes this up, so we still keep the quantum vulnerable transaction types if we want to. It's implementation detail. But we add this second part of the block, which actually contains all of the post-quantum transactions. And we have the non-witness data kind of represented by the smaller blocks, and then we have this single BitZip witness, which is a proof that all of these transactions are valid. So the users are going to broadcast their post-quantum transactions with the post-quantum signatures to the miners, and then the miners are going to prove that all of these transactions are valid as of the block that they're building. And then when they actually publish the block, they take out all of the witnesses from those transactions, those giant signatures, and replace it with this single cryptographic validity proof. And that's how you're able to get those transactions to be so much smaller, because you're not actually including the witnesses. And so to compare the kind of throughput that you get from that, again, we're kind of going to represent the current transactions per second as this single block. If you implement post-quantum signatures without BitZip, then in your best case scenario with one of the smaller signatures, you go from 11 transactions per second down to 1.69 transactions per second. And then with this BitZip technique, assuming that all of the transactions in the block have been bit-zipped, you actually increase your transaction throughput from 11 transactions per second to 87 transactions per second, because we're stripping out all witness data and replacing it with this single cryptographic proof that gets amortized over all of the post-quantum transactions. So, again, a kind of visual representation of a Bitcoin transaction. We're either omitting, in the case of everything that is shaded orange here, we're just stripping all of that out, And then for the stuff that's shaded black, we're able to like compress that significantly, and then just cryptographically prove using this validity proof that all of this stuff existed at some point and was valid at the time that the block was constructed. So here's that comparison chart again. Just to quickly summarize for folks who are watching this presentation independently, we've got these large post-quantum signature algorithms that produce signatures, SLH DSA, about 8,000 bytes, MLDSA, almost 4,000 bytes, and these produce transactions per second on layer 1 of 0.82 and 1.69 transactions per second, respectively, whereas BitZip and some of the other post-quantum like proof-based aggregation systems like rollups or shielded CSV could actually increase our transactions per second and give us somewhere between 83 and 104 transactions per second. And this future proof column is referring to the fact that if improvements to the signature post-quantum signature system, or if a bug was found and we need to fix the bug, this would require a consensus change. So we consider that to be not future proof because we have to now go through a consensus change again, whereas with these other techniques like rollups or shielded CSV, at least at the transaction layer, we have some level of future proof because we can change the post-quantum cryptographic scheme that is being used without having to do any consensus changes. So it is future proof to a degree that the other post-quantum techniques are not. But yeah, so some open questions with the BitZip proposal are like, okay, we've reduced the amount of data that we have to put on chain. That's great. But we're still broadcasting these very large signatures over the wire, over the peer-to-peer network, into miners' mempools. Is there anything that we can do to reduce Bitcoin peer-to-peer bandwidth increases due to the larger size of these post-quantum signatures, pre-Starkification? That's a technical term that I just made up. Some ideas are that like users could interactively aggregate their signatures together ahead of time, or if like one user is like a power user that's receiving a lot of transactions and sending a lot of transactions, then they might be able to aggregate a lot of these things together and maybe do some cut-throughs and things like that before sending that on to the miner with their own validity proof that the miner can then kind of recursively include in the final proof that actually goes on chain. But yeah, it's kind of an open question. There are some ideas, but there could be more potential solutions there. There's a question about like, how does fee bumping work for these post-quantum transactions? So, once a miner receives the transaction and it starts, producing this validity proof, and then they receive an RBF or, that proof that they've been working on is no longer valid. So they either have to throw that proof away, replace the transaction and start over, or ignore that RBF. It's not as easy to do an RBF as it is in kind of the mining world today. So that's an open question. How can we prevent in mempool and in block Starkification from becoming a centralizing force that harms censorship resistance? So, if there are these incentives for users to, say, aggregate their transactions beforehand, maybe does that create a centralization that, could affect censorship resistance? especially if the users who are doing that are maybe paying a lower fee than the users that are not. And so it just becomes more expensive for users to deal directly with the miners. Or, even at the mining layer itself, if all the miners are using like one big beefy machine to do this proving, like kind of sharing it like old school mainframe style, that's a point of centralization, and is something to be considered. So, yeah, open question there, and then important question to answer, especially for folks who've been paying attention to what's happening in like the ZK and validity proof space, is like, how can we mitigate against Stark verifier bugs? So this would be a verifier that's built into Bitcoin Core or another Bitcoin full node implementation. And if there's a bug in that verifier, then the node could be tricked into accepting a block that actually contains invalid transactions, which would be bad. And so, I was talking to one guy last night, and he said about this proposal, it was the first time he had encountered the proposal, but he said, I like non-negotiably, if it was up to him, he would require there to be like multiple verifiers or multiple verifier implementations. Just because if there was only a single implementation and it had a bug, then it could lead to a permanent kind of loss of funds. Whereas if you had multiple independent implementations, it's unlikely that they all have the same bug. And so you might actually be able to prevent that bug from causing like a catastrophic permanent loss of funds on the network. So yeah, I think actually like how do we roll this out in a way that's safe is also an open question. So again, I mentioned this is based on work by Ethan Heilman. This is a QR code for the post that he published on his blog about this. I think the post itself was kind of inspired by a lot of other similar kinds of work, including like work on rollups. But yeah, credit to Ethan for putting it together, and happy to take questions about it.
All right, we got one question.
Thank you for creating a great intuition for BitZip. I was wondering, like, do you have any numbers on like how long would like a get block template take to like do this aggregation? Like what on like a 3 gigahertz CPU? What are we talking?
No, I don't. Sorry.
Milliseconds, seconds, hours.
So there is a project called ZeroSync that is attempting to basically like Starkify the whole Bitcoin blockchain right now as a way of enabling people to quickly sync the blockchain. And I think proving the validity of a single block was estimated to be on the order of like tens of minutes, maybe hours. I don't remember what the kind of state of the art was at the last juncture of that project, but it wasn't like they weren't able to do it within the span of like a block. So it couldn't. I don't think it's practical for real time, quote unquote, real time proving at this point. But it was also, I think, fairly unoptimized at the time. So there's a lot of headroom for optimization, I think, still in proving Bitcoin consensus specifically.
Thanks for the great presentation. I had a somewhat related question on if you've looked into like if the miners would need like new hardware to be deployed or co-located. And slightly related is the if any of these signatures like over the network like compress well, or if you have looked into those.
Mm-hmm. In terms of hardware, you probably would want some kind of dedicated proving hardware, GPUs, or there are even people talking about like ZK ASICs, which yeah, or just like hardware that's extremely optimized specifically for this kind of proving. And so you would probably want something like that to be competitive. And in terms of what was your other question?
Yeah, I should have been more clear. The P2P message passing. If
Oh,
like,
yeah,
you can just-
aggregating.
Yeah, aggregating. Like,
Yeah,
if that
yeah.
compresses.
Yeah. I mean, I think it depends on the post-quantum signature algorithm that you're using. Maybe if the algorithm itself like lends itself to aggregation, either like interactive or otherwise, you could do something like that. I mean, one of the problems with like trying to non-interactively aggregate things in a peer-to-peer way with like random people is this kind of free rider problem when it comes to fees. Yeah, I think Ethan could probably explain it better, but I think there's like a problem where if somebody else's transaction, I don't know, is like smaller than yours, and you aggregate your signatures like ahead of time, you might end up subsidizing some of their transactions or something like that. I forget the exact details, but I do have it in my mind that there is some kind of incentive or for like free rider problem with aggregating, trying to do this like signature or like non-interactive aggregation with random strangers.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks.
Hey, great presentation. Have you modeled out or thought about kind of what the failure mode or what the behavior is if there's a reorg? Like if miners are going to generate a validity proof for the block and discard all the signatures, and then there's a reorg and not all of the transactions make it in, what happens now is unconfirmed transactions go back into the mempool, but if everybody's already dumped all of those signatures, then you might have transactions that miners can't generate proofs of without people rebroadcasting. So just as I was watching your talk, I was wondering, like, can you imagine an implementation where miners like hold on to signatures for a couple of blocks or something, or do something else to make sure that they still have witness data to regenerate proofs?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think you would have to kind of switch to a model from immediately kind of flushing your mempool to like hanging on to those transactions for a while until you think that they're not going to be reordered.
6 blocks deep or something, or whatever it is.
And it could be a configurable parameter, but yeah. All right, yeah, thank you all.
Moving to our last discussion for the Quantum Bitcoin Summit. Let's welcome Steve, Taj, and Clara to the stage. This is going to be our Where Do We Go From Here panel, wrapping up the last day and a half of content and answering all of our questions for us.
Best stops for picnic.
All right, here we go. We ready? Cool. Hi, everyone. Before we start, I don't know if anyone's going to have a chance to thank the two people who did the most work to put this together, and that's Austin and Alex. So, big round of applause.
I just want to jump in. Also, D++. Let's give her a round of applause.
Thank you, D++. It's been a wonderful 1.5 days, and I think everyone's been thrilled with like the content, the structure, the pacing. I thought the breakout groups yesterday were a really nice change of pace. So thanks so much, Austin. And yeah, everything went really well. So thanks, guys. So what are we going to talk about? I'm joined by two awesome people, Taj and Clara, to talk about where do we go next. I thought the best way to talk about this is not really to go proposal by proposal, but instead think about different stakeholder groups in Bitcoin, like users and investors, developers, miners, and we'll see how much time we have to go through different groups. But go through each group and then just have a discussion about what do we learn and what do we think are reasonable steps for each group. So maybe we start with users. So just any user of the system, for any use case they might use Bitcoin, what should they do next? Maybe
Well,
either of you can start.
I think most of the users, not much. Chillax. Probably you're using modern addresses, you're not address reusing. If you're doing everything okay right now, continue with your day, enjoy the summer, and so on. If you do have outdated addresses that we discussed here, you might want to consider moving the funds. But beyond that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, basically, keep your software up to date, right? So if you're like, oh, I've got, you know, Bitcoin 0.9 from 2014 or something, and it's like, well, you probably should upgrade, but I mean, yeah, it's working, so you might not want to. But yeah, this is one thing where you might pay a little more attention and upgrade. But I do think it's the kind of, we don't want to make it something where you're telling the user, well, like lattices or Sphinx. Because they're like, what? You know, like, so I don't think it's the necessarily normal user's responsibility to like have to do these things. Hopefully, the software developers can do that.
But like advice that we already give users that don't reuse addresses, we could just like double down on that advice and give yet another reason, and it might resonate with a segment of users who might be concerned about quantum, and then it's like, okay, this is one way I can protect myself.
Yeah, and tell them that like, hey, these wallets, don't reuse addresses, or won't reuse addresses, or like have better properties. So like, use this. It's hard to, and you could also tell them, hey, don't, or like, hey, I want to recommend silent payments, but I don't think silent payments works with post-quantum stuff, right? So, but it's hard because it's like changing a behavior that maybe they're very used to. But you can still try to tell them like, hey, and the distinction of reuse as in you can give an address and receive multiple payments and then spend all those at the same, and then use a new address. So it's a little tricky, like what you're actually preventing.
Another tricky one would be taproot addresses, meaning it seems a little painful to not recommend using taproot addresses, but there's a little bit of conflict there. Another,
Just about taproot addresses, I think right now there is no reason not to use them. It's of course a personal opinion, but for now, keep using taproot addresses until when we'll get to the developers and researchers, other modern solutions will be out there, but right now I see no reason not to use taproot addresses, especially if you're not moving funds that, if you're not going to be one of the first 100 targets, yeah, go ahead, use Taproot.
Another controversial one would be seedless is safer. So Bitkey, spicy. Because Bitkey has been promoting that. I'm actually personally an advocate for products that don't use seed phrases. Jameson's here. Casa, I know, at least historically, sort of recommended against using them, but maybe you guys have changed your stance over time. But there's definitely, that's a whole nother separate topic, but just to add to that debate is there might be a future where seed phrase helps you prove that these are my coins that were frozen and get them back. So that just adds to that spicy debate. Okay, so we covered users. Let's talk about developers next. And I don't know if you want to lump researchers and developers together. Up to you.
Yeah, I think one of the obvious thing to do is like work on this stuff. But at the same time, there will be people who, developers who do not want to work on this, and it makes sense. Like, there's already this kind of thing where like there's a lot of core developers who like do not want to be involved in consensus changes, right? Whether it's PTSD from, SegWit or for a lot of things, it's just like, look, I don't, it's a decentralized system, and there's like an inherent tendency for things to start centralizing and there to be like leaders and, stuff like that. And so it's sort of an active thing of like, I'm not in charge of this, or like, I don't make these changes. And I think some of the post-quantum stuff is like an extreme example of that, where like, I'm not going to merge the code that like destroys 6 million coins. Like, no, like who's going to do that? It's just sort of like, no, I'm not merging. I'm like, there's like going to be a lot of like, I'm not touching that, because not even legal. Like, what if there's someone who's got millions of dollars of coins that you just destroy? Like it's like, you don't, like, it's really hard. I think there may, so it may be that there's new developers or new people that are like, okay, I'll make that. Like a lot of times the code itself isn't that complex. It's more of a, I don't want to be responsible for this. So I think the safe things to work on, like hash-based signatures, and like there's a lot of cool stuff there. And like, let's look at, these kinds of how do we add new things. The controversial stuff, I can definitely see, like I personally, like I kind of don't want to touch it, right? And I think a lot of, other Bitcoin developers are like, kind of want to stay away from that stuff. It's still
except
cool
for your commit and reveal proposal.
Well, that's why I was like, this works, and that was why it was good yesterday. I was like, this works with either freeze or burn, but then like people ask questions and pointed things out. I'm like, ooh, like it does kind of tend towards freeze. I should like make it more, but it's yeah. So it's like, hey, here's an option. Like I'm not going to make a PR to Bitcoin Core with that stuff. I want to like put out options and stuff. But I think, and that's where we are right now. It's not like, hey, let's activate this. It's like, okay, here's options, here's code. That's my thinking. And I think there will be new like it just seems like you're going to have new developers come in, and whether that's good or bad, I don't know. Yeah.
Pseudonyms probably as well.
Maybe,
help
yeah,
protect you.
yeah.
So maybe things like Lifeboat or things like that can be worked on, but I think most of the heavy lifting that has to do with the cryptography, we're not there yet. So maybe this is, if we're talking about researchers and developers together, we're still waiting for cryptographers that are well-versed in Bitcoin to look over the options, to think. So on that end, I think there are some peripheral projects to work on, but on the hardcore things, we're just not there yet.
Yeah, and it's like one of the cool things about the discussion yesterday was like, how would you even implement freeze, right? And it's like, oh, and there's a lot of like pushback, like, no, this is like kind of impossible to implement. It's like, well, it's possible. So it's like good to have discussion, but it is a weird scenario where I think a lot of existing Bitcoin developers will not necessarily want to be involved. And so it makes complete sense why. And so I think it's an interesting time where I would say like, yeah, let's welcome external developers, people that haven't really worked on Bitcoin before, to try to contribute and maybe help them and stuff. But it's like, there's definitely going to be some, hesitancy from a lot of existing developers, I think.
For researchers, what are your thoughts on, there's a lot of cryptography researchers who have nothing to do with Bitcoin, who are trying to advance post-quantum cryptography. How should researchers within Bitcoin, like yourself, think about this? And is there room to try to encourage and advocate further advances there, or accelerating, or
So
is it already going as fast as it possibly can?
I don't know if it's going as fast as it can, especially outside of the Bitcoin space, just because in academia, as in everywhere, it's a question of funding. But there are even signature schemes that we feel comfortable with, that have been around for a while. For example, we don't have key aggregation. We don't have a lot of the things that we want to make the transition as seamless as possible. So there are really concrete, well-defined research questions out there. And I think you need to know more about cryptography than about Bitcoin. It's good to know in which space you're living, but yeah, I think this is the skill set that we need in where we are right now.
I just saw something going back to users. So So just general users, if they're not technical, they're not going to be in a position to help with some of these challenging technical problems. But some of the questions before us are philosophical, and that's something that's accessible to anyone. So, like continuing to have discussions about burn versus freeze and other philosophical questions, that's another thing that interested parties, if you're super passionate about this, if you're super worried about this, that is something that anyone could participate in various discussion forums.
Although honestly, to make these discussions in some way fruitful, you probably want to be data-driven, look for other example, look like, it's a free world, you can go out there and shout on the internet, whatever you want. But yeah, it's a beautiful weather almost everywhere, so maybe you should just go on a walk.
But no, I mean that you're gonna have that, and sure, like but in terms of users, like I hope that it's not a case where developers are also giving, like, on the one hand, choice is great, but it's like you don't give users choice. Like OpenSSL is great. Like, hey, do you want to use ECB or CBC? And you're like, I don't ECB. Oh no, you lost everything, right? So it's like, hey, do you want to use? Here's all these like choices. It's pretty dangerous. And if one of the choices, hey, do you like destroying all those coins or like letting them be stolen? And it's like, well, is that going to be like a drop-down menu in Bitcoin Core? Like, I don't know.
Also, it's not happening anytime soon, so it's like you can have like a very long argument now, and then in 5 years, a bunch of new people, like it's a strange time.
Yeah. If you're,
as a user to consider this, you're more than welcome, but yeah.
I hope this doesn't happen, but I wouldn't be super surprised if there ends up being a deep disagreement and a fork, right? If you long term you say like, no, we have to destroy these coins, no, we have to let them be stolen, and then you have two different coins, and in that case, users should definitely take their coins off an exchange, have the access to their coins, so they can, do the sell one, buy the other kind of thing if they want.
Speaking about exchanges, users can clap at exchanges that are doing address reuse.
Yeah, well, that's one of the
next.
next.
This is a very good use.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll talk about businesses.
Yeah.
But I would just say, first of all, I agree. The burn versus freeze, I think, is the hardest question out of all the ones discussed and posed the past 2 days. I agree with high risk of fork. But that's also why having discussions over time and development of thought and socializing that does have value. And I'm certainly not advocating, I don't think this is like so urgent of a problem that everyone has to be participating in this conversation every day. But even just a small percentage of people who are into Bitcoin who are intellectually fascinated by this, philosophically fascinated by it, and care about the long term of Bitcoin, if they contribute content and thought and improve that over time, it might be multiple waves, like this cycle and then the next cycle, but we keep improving that thought, and it could decrease the chances of a fork in the future.
Just remember not to feed the trolls.
Right. So let's see. Should we let's segue to businesses because you're
Can I
just
do
talking.
one researchers? If you are
Oh, yeah.
a quantum computing researcher, and you break SecP, please make a proof and don't steal coins. that will like make everything so much easier. Like, look, we have a proof that this actually exists. Then we know what to do.
White hat, good.
What?
White hat,
Yeah,
good.
yeah. I
Yes.
mean, if you're at a university,
Businesses, yeah. So what should like the Binances of the world and what should they do? What are their next
stop
steps?
reusing addresses. It's so easy.
Say it louder for the people in the back.
Yeah, and have users start complaining, and I think that's one of the good things of like the outcomes of this is if you start to have investors or people saying like, hey, wait, these nerds in San Francisco that work on this cryptography and Bitcoin stuff, they say that what you're doing is risky. And like it's like, well, no, it's complicated. There's like a million different things, but it's like, yeah, essentially, there's no downside, right? Like if you just don't reuse addresses, there's really no extra downside. It's just that you, wrote the software 10 years ago or something.
So that's another thing that users can do, right? Like if you're a customer of Binance or any exchange that's reusing addresses, complain.
Or move to one that doesn't do, there are exchanges that have better security practices and stuff, so.
Okay, that's great. What else should businesses be doing, thinking about? Nothing else?
Funding developers and researchers.
Sounds good to me.
Come to these kind, be at these kind of conferences. If there's people who work at exchanges or ETFs or who are like in that side, it would be cool to hear their opinions on these things and what they're thinking about. So.
Also, if you have any questions, again, address reuse or things like that, there's a bunch of people that will be more than happy to explain how to avoid this, what should be done. It's there are people that would love to help, so we're here.
How about miners? And we already see some miners doing things. Several of them, attended, spoke, and are proposing solutions. Anything else miners should be doing as next steps?
Maybe be careful if this whole discussion of burn versus steel does heat up. Be careful, because I think you'll get side-eyed, like as an interested party. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know that there's anything directly that miners have, like, if things start getting crazy, they need to pay attention and start being like, oh, we got to pick software, we got to pick if there's a fork or something. But right now it doesn't seem, from my understanding, from talking to different mining, their focus isn't cryptography or elliptic, it's like we have the hardware, so it's not necessary at this point. It doesn't seem something that's like super miner involved. Hopefully we don't get to the point where it does become miner involved. We're like, hey, there's these soft forks and there's these, but that may happen.
So maybe the last group we cover, investors, and perhaps this is the most important one in the sense that maybe that group is the most sensitive to this issue, or at least some portion of investors, or prospective investors. They're not yet into Bitcoin, they're attracted to it, but they're concerned about this issue. So what would be some thoughts and advice for them?
So maybe returning for the advice with the users. Don't address reuse. Talk to entities that do address reuse, because if there's going to be a huge disaster, it's going to affect all of us.
Yeah, I mean, if investors can, because it does seem like from the talk yesterday, most of the address reuse is like investor, it's not individuals, or at least in aggregate, the majority is exchanges, ETF kind of stuff. So it's like, okay, you can fix this and protect yourselves and your investments. So that's a pretty easy one. I think the interesting one is investors that are not invested in Bitcoin right now, potentially because of and that's one of the reasons I got interested in this. I was like talking to someone and being like, oh, I bet there's never going to be a quantum computer. And he's like, well, I take that bet. And that's why I don't have Bitcoin. I'm like, oh, shoot. I should think about it, because I want more people to be able to use Bitcoin. And that's not a crazy worry. I may disagree with that worry, but it's like that's why I sort of said it as a bet, because it's like, yeah, we both have legitimate opinions. But I'm like, no, we shouldn't push away people that have this idea. And so I think that's one of the reasons to do this. Even if you don't think there's very much risk of this happening, to have stuff in place so that people can say, okay, they're actually paying attention to this. They're not just completely, putting their head in the sand or whatever. For the people that think it's a real risk, I have heard that they're like, hey, how come no core developers want to talk to us about this at a conference 2 years ago? And I was like, well, yeah, I get it. And and so I've definitely talked to not as technical, but lawyers and investors and stuff that were concerned about this. Mostly because it's there's government top down, hey guys, 2030 or 2035, you need to change the NIST, whatever. And then they're like, well, Bitcoin's not doing that. So if the government says you have to and Bitcoin doesn't, what do we do? And from Bitcoin developers were like, we don't care what the government says. But it is I think it could be good for these, potential investors to say, okay, now we're interested that people are looking at these problems, and they're not going to ignore it, so we can become involved, we can start investing as well.
I also think, this event itself has produced a lot of great thinking, content. We're recording this and we'll publish it for those who missed the live stream. So that'll be available for investors. There's several people who attended who I know are going to create summaries or content. Shinobi's going to, and I think he maybe even interviewed some of the people here. I think in a few, I don't know if they want to be named. So a few other people might be writing summaries. So I think that'll be good content for investors and hopefully accessible for investors. What about, it might be good from developers, and it could just be simply one developer, but like write up as unbiased as possible of summary of like, here are the technical options. Here's like 3 different roadmap options, and needs to be framed properly. That this isn't like the core dev roadmap position, but here's reasonably well thought out roadmap options. Here's the trade-offs, the remaining questions. I think that would and make that create an accessible language to the broader Bitcoin population. I think that would be valuable. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, and so, I mean, writing it up, and also the things that were not, so like, this is like version 1, this conference. There were a lot of things being talked about that I was talking to people about today, yesterday, there were no talks of, because we hadn't even really thought through. And so it was like, yeah, well, if we start talking about forks, because no one really wants that to happen, but it's like, wait, if we did, how are the dynamics going to work in these cases? Like, we have some experience from 2017 and seeing what happened there, but this would be pretty different, because now there's like these replays and quantum computing, and interestingly seeing, oh wait, if you moved Bitcoin Cash but left your pay to pub key hash from back then, actually wait, you did reveal the pub key, and like things like, so there's a lot of interesting things going on with forks that could be an interesting discussion. It's also a kind of weird discussion, because you're like, well, I hope none of this happens, but if it did, and I don't like, does talking about it make it more likely to happen? Kind of. So I think there's a lot of new topics that we can sort of get into just from like learning about what everyone else is thinking here.
So I do think we need like a summary of these events. Maybe we need more events like this, but it has to do with what I said earlier. It's probably too early to have like a Bitcoin roadmap, because we don't know which signatures we're going to use. We don't know enough at this point. So this is time to think about it, learn.
And Bitcoin roadmaps never work. Yeah. Like, no, who you
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm more like, if I'm an investor, I'm not super deep in the technicals, I'm worried about quantum, I do think a summary would be helpful to be like, okay, here's the 5 most pressing questions, some of which are like post-quantum cryptography, and then like, if we had to do it in the next year or 2, here are the options and the drawbacks and trade-offs. And then, projecting forward some unknown amount of time, but like in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years, we just expect that to continue to improve. But just a summary like that would be valuable, and it's not like committing anyone to anything. It's not a roadmap, but it's just sort of a accurate picture.
Yeah. And can put it in context, because I think it could be very disruptive. Like, you don't want to be like, oh yeah, we got this, we're figuring it out. Like, it could be extremely disruptive. If a quantum computer happens soon. But you have to put it in context, like, other things would also get pretty messed up, if that, because that's sort of a surprise, like, all these things break. But, to be fair, probably Bitcoin more than most other things. And so you don't want to be like, oh yeah, we got this, like, but sort of say like, look, yeah, if it happens in the next couple of years, it's significant impact to Bitcoin, and, it's going to be a big mess. So if you're an investor and you're worried, like, I think that, this is going to happen soon, then maybe don't invest as much. Like, we don't, we're not chilling it, right? Yeah. But sort of put these risks and, parameterize everything and say like, okay, but yeah, one of the things that's hard is we don't know. There's so many unknowns about these things, so we can't really tell what's going to happen.
To advocate for the summary, I think it's valuable, because without it, if I'm an investor, and it just, to me, sounds like they haven't even thought about it. No one's thought about this. And like, so if it did happen in the next like 2, 3, 5 years or whatever, just in my calculus would be like, it's over, it's dead. And that could very well be true. But if we share, here are like 3 options of what we would do in an emergency or panic. There's some probability of Bitcoin not dying. And then they can then enter that into their expected value calculation for their investment.
So not to toot my own horn, but this is sort of what we try to do in the report. We say there, we go over possible signatures and things like that. We have a timeline. And I don't see a realistic way of saying more, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you can. This is, you get ideas from. One of the things we do need more, like well, the first talk here was, okay, I don't know that much about quantum computers, right? Like, should we be talking more to people who are researching these things and having ideas of, what, and that's one of the things they said, like, in 5 years, we'll have a much better understanding of the roadmap of how these things are going to develop. And so definitely we'll keep paying attention to that. And, I definitely search for like news on quantum computing and read like, Microsoft major run and then controversy, so it's like we're paying attention, but it is still like a very like unknown place we're going.
Austin, do you want us to open up to audience questions or even ideas, or we can
If anyone has anything, any comments, questions,
Looking to what to work on.
hot takes. 1, 2.
This was really great. Summit, very high signal, and I think we got like a lot of alignment, or at least brought a lot of things to surface. Are there already existing avenues like groups or mailing lists or some things where we can continue the conversation and kind of get more towards like, this is where most up-to-date information is going to be shared, and if one doesn't exist, maybe this could be a good group to bootstrap one.
I'll share a few thoughts. Well, first of all, I mean, an idea for like Austin and Alex, we have the Presidio Bitcoin public Discord, and so we could have a channel for this event and continue discussion there. That's one idea.
Yeah, just another shout out to D++. She brought up that idea yesterday. We did create a Signal group chat, which we were going to share, but we could turn that into a different format if another one's better.
Yeah, and in terms of like public, like everyone, there's the existing Bitcoin Dev mailing list, which is where I would say like half the stuff now is being posted about post-quantum stuff, right? Like it's in the last few months, it's definitely like not taken over. There's lots of other stuff too, but it's like one of the main topics there. And then Delving Bitcoin, which is run by AJ, like I feel like there's not as much as quantum stuff there as the mailing list, but both are good places.
And for those unfamiliar, like Bitcoin-Dev mailing list, I think is the highest quality. It's also a higher bar to like post and respond. So which is what usually delivers the higher quality. But there's different types of communication that people want to engage in. It can also be, that type of list can be intimidating for a lot of people because like, am I worthy to even post here? Delving is a little bit lower bar, but still pretty high quality. And then I think the Presidio Bitcoin Discord can be like for all of us. So, and then Twitter is definitely for everyone.
Yes, this is maybe kind of like not abstract enough of a question or something, but like I'm just find something kind of like not satisfying about the situation with like Taproot outputs. I wonder if like this is less a question. I guess this is more a thought, but I wonder if like it like for something like Lifeboat or whatever it's called, if it would make sense to like recommend that like Taproot, when you make like wallets should make script paths always for Taproot addresses or something like that. That would, if that was happening, then Taproot would have the same level of like whatever next step next step option or something like
That's
that.
the Blue Mat proposal, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I don't think that's but I think that recommendation, because it's really low cost, right? You just say, look, wallet software should also include a script path, even if it's just one key, also include a script path with basically the same key. I mean, it can't be exactly the same key, but similar key. Because then you do have this option to do sort of some kind of commit reveal or other proofs that are quantum secure. And most wallets do not do that right now. But it's so that would be a good change, I think, for developers. The only reason not to is like, oh, we don't want to because it's we don't think this is an issue. But it's like, well, come on, it's a pretty easy thing to change, and it has really no downsides. So yeah. I like it too. So let's merge it into Core Wallet. Let's ask as I have it here.
All right. I guess the last question is, where is the picnic?
Yeah.
We'll figure that out and we'll let you know. I think it's Picnic Place or something. All right, let's give a round of applause. I want to also one more very big round of applause for XFrog over here, who did audio, visual. The man is the engine that keeps the Bitcoin space running.
And a quick shout out to Pamela and David for helping us at the door. You all met them in the check-in process and helped keep us, I guess, secure in this room. So thank you for your efforts cleaning up and helping us orchestrate this event. The picnic's at the Presidio picnic area. Again, if you're looking this way towards the Golden Gate Bridge, you're going to walk out the doors, immediately take a right, and it's about the same distance as the Officer Club, but towards the water. We can all walk together. We can all make a journey out of it. But yeah, thank you. I think that's a wrap on the Presidio Bitcoin Quantum Bitcoin Summit. Thank you all so much for being here. As mentioned, it was the high signal, the amazing content. Hopefully the summaries will be useful. That really was the intent around this whole event. So thank you all for being here and making that a reality. It certainly couldn't be Austin and I talking to each other, but really everyone that's in this room made this event so fantastic. Not only to host and be a part of, but hopefully a good foundation for events to come. So certainly stay tuned to everything happening here at Presidio Bitcoin. We'll get the Discord signal or the Discord channel rocking and rolling. And yeah, really looking forward to staying in touch. So thank you all again.
There will